Diamonds Are a Ghost's Best Friend by Danielle Garrett. Narrated by Amanda Ronconi. Introduction. Diamonds are a ghost's best friend. Going to the chapel and we're gonna get haunted? I've got a ring on my finger and a date circled on the calendar. Let the wedding planning begin. As luck would have it, the little wooded chapel I've got my heart set on is plagued by the not-so-nice spirit of a former bride. She died on what was meant to be her wedding day and isn't going to step aside to let anyone else take her place at the altar. She claims the chapel is cursed and points to her own murder as a sure sign. But I'm not convinced. I'll have to keep my new Reaper powers in check and solve this case the old-fashioned way, if Lucas and I have any shot at starting our happily ever after underneath the majestic pines. Chapter 1. Scar, why couldn't you have found a flower shop to run in Barbados? One hand resting on my broom, I turned to smile at Flapjack, my ghostified Himalayan. You miss the sun too? He frowned down at me from his perch in the front display window. According to him, the high shelf gave the best view of the main strip through town, perfect for people watching. Or, in Flapjack's case, people judging. I'm a cat. What do you think? At least it's quiet, I said with a wistful sigh. Outside the flower shop, the gray skies stretched as far as I could see, and a fresh downpour pelted the windows with icy raindrops. Even in November, there was beauty to be found along the rustic coastline of Washington State. Granted, it was a little harder to find. Have you even had a single customer all day? Flapjack asked. I scowled at the reminder. Maybe it was a little too quiet. Then again, business always slumped in the off-season. It was simply the nature of life in a small coastal town. Summertime was always bursting with tourists, and each day flew by in a blur. But in the fall and winter, things slowed back down and let everyone catch their breath. As the only flower shop in town, I managed to stay busy enough to keep the lights on, even when the harbor wasn't up to its neck in tourists. But I still had to be careful and not burn through my savings before the following June. I like the winter, Gwen, another spirit, chimed in. People get bored, and bored people tend to get into trouble. A mischievous smile danced across her lips. And trouble always makes for a good story. Gwen was the town's gossip maven. She knew everything about everyone, and then some. It didn't matter if you were living or dead. If you resided within a 10-mile radius of the harbor, she had you on her radar. Her 40-plus years as a ghost had largely been spent mining the locals and spinning a narrative that rivaled any of the daytime soap operas. For a small, barely a dot on the map kind of town, there was more than enough drama to go around. Speaking of stories, I said, reaching for my coffee cup, how's the Tuesday crowd? Oh, they're all fine. Gwen dismissed the question, waving her hand. It's the same old with that group. I arched a brow. You're not regretting taking over my position, are you? No, I like hosting everyone, but you know how it is. She shrugged. Nothing really changes, and there haven't been any new members to liven things up. Flapjack snorted. That should be the definition of insanity, waiting for a group of dead people to liven up a party. Gwen ignored the sarcastic feline. Truth be told, Scarlet, we end up talking about you most of the time. What? Why? I asked, slightly taken aback. I'd formed the informal ghost support group shortly after moving into town, as a way to keep my day-to-day life as spirit-free as possible. It had never been about me. In fact, most of the time, I'd had little to contribute. I'd been seeing and speaking with ghosts since I was 8 years old, but still lacked the experience of walking a mile in their proverbial shoes, and I often felt unqualified to offer more than a sympathetic ear and occasional blanket advice to those processing their new life after death. We have a pool going for when and where you and Lucas will be getting married. All the little details right down to the style of dress and type of flowers, she replied. Flapjack scoffed. Good thing you're all already dead. Otherwise, I'd say you're in danger of boring yourselves to death. Gwen smiled sweetly at the fluffy cat. Oh, Flapjack, you really should pursue a career in stand-up comedy. You've clearly missed your calling. I snorted into my coffee cup. I must say, I'm of a like mind with Flapjack on this, my dear," Hayward Kensington III interjected. He stood before the other store window as Flapjack, watching the dreary morning fog roll by. He glanced back to me with a slight grimace. "I don't intend that as a slight against you, Lady Scarlet. Truly, I am ecstatic over your pending nuptials, but the wedding talk can become duller than a rusty butter knife," Flapjack offered helpfully. Hayward scowled at the cat. "It can be quite dry." Gwen planted her fists on her slim hips and tossed her long hair over her shoulder. "You don't have to listen, then. I'm sure there's a TV somewhere you could plop your butts in front of." I returned the broom to the closet and circled back to the computer on the front counter. My coffee was lukewarm, but I drank the last of it anyway while I waited for my inbox to fully populate. No time like the present to get started on the day's orders. As I placed my hands on my keyboard, my gaze snagged on the cushion-cut emerald sparkler on my left ring finger, and I smiled to myself. I'd been wearing it since Lucas's proposal at the end of the summer, but its presence on my hand still caught me off guard sometimes, and I'd get a giddy butterflies in my stomach feeling. "We should go to McNally's," Flapjack suggested to Hayward. "Sturgeon hangs out there before they open, and he can work the remote control." Hayward frowned, even as he started gliding toward the front door. "Yes, but we have to come to an agreement on what to watch. Otherwise we'll be stuck watching one of his infernal automobile races." "See you later," Flapjack said. "Try not to have too much fun talking about veils and tiaras." I rolled my eyes as the cat and old-timey English gentleman slipped through the door. "I honestly don't know if I like it better when they're arguing or being friendly with each other," Gwen mused, her eyes trailing the unlikely duo as they wandered down the sidewalk. I laughed softly as the printer whirred into action. "I've been asking myself that same question for a long time. I'll let you know if I come up with the answer." Flapjack had been my childhood cat, first in living color, and then as a ghost after his untimely passing, ironically winding up as both my first pet and my first encounter with the spirit world. Hayward was a more recent companion, but we'd spent several years together at this point, and it was hard to remember what life had been like without his regal presence. "They're happy for you," Gwen told me in an earnest tone. "You know that, don't you?" I nodded. "I do." Gwen squealed. "I do!" Walked right into that one. "So come on. Now that those fuddy-duddies are gone, tell me all about the wedding plans," she gushed, her feather earrings swaying as she clapped excitedly. "You're going to make the most beautiful bride." "Thank you," I replied, smiling. "To be honest, we haven't really decided on anything yet. It's still early days." Gwen's smile faded. "Scarlet, it's been 3 months." Judging by the crestfallen look on her face, 3 months was an eternity in wedding planning years. "I mean, it's November. If you have any hope of pulling together a half-decent spring wedding, you need to be on the ball." "Oh, we're not trying for spring," I said, sorting through the orders and placing them in order of importance. "We're thinking next September." I glanced up. "At the earliest." Across the workbench, Gwen deflated like a leaky balloon. "Come on, don't give me that face. Waiting a year isn't the end of the world. It's just that we have a lot of things to untangle before we get to I do." "Like what?" Gwen asked, her eyes going wide. "You're not having second thoughts, are you?" "No." "Okay. Phew." She mimed, wiping her brow, and sank back down in her chair. "Nothing like that," I assured her. "I meant logistical stuff. Where we're going to live, what I'm going to do with the flower shop, where to go on the honeymoon, that kind of thing." Lucas had recently landed a job with a high-tech international security firm based out of Seattle. It was a lot closer to home than his last job, traveling the country with a home renovation TV show, but Seattle was still a good 3-hour drive from Beechwood Harbor. Balancing a long-distance relationship on top of 2 demanding jobs, a house hunt, and wedding plans was going to be a delicate dance. We were willing to take our time to make sure we didn't miss a step. "I suppose I should be glad the wedding is a little ways off," Gwen said, "as that will mean you'll be here in Beechwood for another summer." A swell of emotion lodged itself in my throat. As successful as Lily Pond had become since I'd opened its doors a little over a year ago, it was never going to be able to compete with the salary Lucas netted at his job in Seattle. and Lucas couldn't relocate to the small town. He liked visiting Beechwood Harbor, but he wouldn't enjoy living here full-time. He liked big cities with lots of things to do and see. I did too. Prior to moving to Beechwood Harbor, I'd never have imagined myself settling down in general, but even less so in a small town. Both of us suffered from an ingrained sense of wanderlust and had initially bonded over our shared love of travel and adventure. The majority of our first dates had been spent sharing a meal while comparing stamps in our passports and telling the stories that went along with them. Travel would always be a part of our life. But somewhere along the way, I'd transformed into a little bit of a homebody in my small-town cocoon. A cocoon I wasn't sure how to leave. Gwen knotted her hands together. I hate to even think of you not being here anymore, Scarlett. I know, I said, a familiar pang in my chest. But I can't ask Lucas to move here and give up his career. Maybe he could find something here in town, Gwen suggested. I think I saw a hiring sign in the front window of that sporting goods store they just built over in Pine Shoals. I smiled. Thanks, Gwen, but I'm pretty sure he'd go crazy within a week doing something like that. The 70s-era ghost shimmered as she slid from the chair and took a turn about the room. Change was hard for anyone, even ghosts. Maybe especially so for ghosts. They were constantly left in the dust, all but forgotten, as the world changed around them. Now it was my life that was moving on, threatening to leave her behind. Gwen, I said gently. She turned. Lucas is coming into town this weekend, and I think we're going to see a chapel on Saturday. Would you maybe want to go with us? You mean it? Gwen asked, clasping her hands together as she surged up a few inches off the floor, her semi-transparent feet dangling over the hardwoods. Sure, I replied with a soft smile. You've got a great eye. You'll be a big help when it comes time to choose a venue. Gwen beamed at the compliment. I won't let you down. I don't understand why Gwen gets to go and you're leaving us here. Gwen's invitation got back to Flapjack and Hayward sometime Saturday morning, and to say Flapjack wasn't happy about it would be a major understatement. Flapjack? I sighed, trying not to blink as I swiped a mascara wand over my lashes. I'd overslept the alarm and was scrambling to get ready. With no time to make breakfast or coffee, Lucas had offered to run down to Siren Song, the local coffee house, for provisions. He was likely waiting at the curb, wondering what on earth was taking me so long. The last thing I needed was a pint-sized furball giving me hell over the perceived snub. It's not your thing. I mean, we're going to walk around, meet the minister or pastor, and talk about our options. Does that really sound like fun to you? No, Flapjack groused. But I still would have liked the chance to tell you I wasn't interested. I rolled my eyes and then swore as little black specks stuck to my eyelids. Peachy, I mumbled, wiping at the stray mascara with my thumb. Be sure to inspect the water closets, Lady Scarlet, Hayward said from the hallway. When I wed my dear Mary, we found ourselves in quite the predicament. I'll spare you the details, but believe me when I say it's imperative that your honoured guests have the proper facilities. Hayward gave an unsavory shake of his head before adding, Granted it was the 1800s, and plumbing wasn't quite up to your modern standards. I tried hard not to laugh as I quickly finished applying my mascara. Noted, I'll check out the bathrooms. Flapjack scoffed. I get why you don't want Mr. Bathroom Inspector tagging along, but come on, Scar. Gwen rolled her eyes. Flapjack, if you're getting all marshmallowy about your little girl getting married, it's okay to just say so. Marshmallowy? Flapjack scoffed. Hardly. Gwen gave me a knowing smile. He's just nosy, I replied, even as a little warm and fuzzy squiggle wrapped around my heart. He knew me better than anyone, my own family included. All right, you win. You've worn me down, Flapjack. Would you like to come to the chapel today? I flicked off the bathroom lights. You have to behave yourself, though. No peanut gallery commentary. Making wedding decisions is hard enough without your mockery. All right, fine, he agreed with a swish of his fluffy tail. We can discuss my preference in fish varieties on the way over. I'm leaning towards salmon. Mackerel or sardines would be my first choice, but I've been informed by Martha Stewart over here that those aren't classy fish. Whatever that's supposed to mean. Flapjack, Gwen sighed. No one wants their wedding reception smelling like a chum bucket. I don't remember promising there'd be fish of any kind at the reception, I told the cat, as I stepped into my well-worn ballet flats. Well, that's just ridiculous, Flapjack snorted. Even I know that those little cards always say fish or chicken. He looked up to Gwen, waiting for her confirmation. It's the couple's choice, she told him. Are you sure about that? I've seen a lot of sitcoms and chick flicks, he replied, as if in complete disbelief that all those hours had apparently been wasted. We have to pick the venue first, I told him. That's the first step. We can't even pick a date until we know where we're getting married. Flapjack peered up at me. Scarlet, maybe you should hire one of those wedding planners. Just make sure they aren't too pretty, otherwise Lucas could fall in love with them and ruin the whole thing. I laughed. I'm not too worried about that. The sassy cat looked me up and down, skepticism in his eyes. Hey, I said, grabbing my purse. You're about 2 seconds away from your invitation being rescinded. Pay him no mind, Lady Scarlet, Hayward said. You'll be a radiant bride. Thank you, Hayward, I replied, giving Flapjack a pointed look. You're true blue. Hayward's bristled mustache twitched. Well, thank you. I have been a little sad lately, but I assure you it's nothing to do with your wedding arrangements. What? Oh, no, I said true blue. It means loyal. I reached out and patted the ghost on the shoulder, and he flinched when my hand made contact with his semi-transparent form. Over the last several months, my ghost-related powers had started to change and grow, and one of the new things, skills, if you want to call it that, was the ability to reach out and touch the spirits around me. When my gift first awakened, there remained a barrier between me and the ghosts around me. For 2 decades, I could see, hear, and speak to ghosts, but not make contact with them. Now, something had shifted, and I could touch them. Something we were all getting used to. I can't wait to see the chapel, Gwen said. Remind me, what colors are you thinking? Personally, I think blush pink paired with dove gray would be beautiful. Oh wait, you're thinking autumn. She tapped her lips and then brightened. What about navy blue and silver? We need to get out of here before little hearts burst from her eyes, Flapjack quipped. He sauntered to the front door and winked out of sight. You coming? He called eerily from the other side. Gwen ignored the cat. What about the reception? Are you thinking indoors? If you pick a date in early September, you'll still have a good chance at nice weather. Then you could do it down on the beach. I mean, Cassie and Sheaf's wedding was glorious. She paused for a dreamy sigh, her hands clasped to her chest. The flowers and the stars and the ocean. It was a fairy tale. I could have stayed there dancing all night. Hayward smiled, his mustache twitching. If I recall, my lady, we did dance all night long. Gwen slid into Hayward's arms and they touched noses. It was a magical night. And that's my cue. I slung my purse over my shoulder and headed for the door. Lucas is already downstairs. Let's get a move on. A ghost waited at the foot of the steps, wringing her hands together as she paced back and forth. She looked up at the sound of my footsteps and surged past me. Gwen! Oh, thank goodness you're here! Beside me, Gwen perked up. Eloise, what are you doing here? I've been looking for you, the young woman said. She glanced nervously at me and then back to Gwen. Is there somewhere we could talk? Gwen looked torn. She never turned down the chance to help someone, and it truly looked as though this Eloise needed assistance of some kind, but she'd been looking forward to the venue showing all week. Lucas's SUV was waiting at the end of the lot, and he flashed his headlights, signaling me over. I held up a finger. To him, of course, it would look as though I'd randomly stopped halfway down the stairs for no reason at all. He couldn't see Eloise, Gwen, Hayward, or Flapjack, and in his eyes, I likely looked dazed and confused a good half of the time. I have to go, I told Gwen gently. Are you coming? Eloise's expression tightened, and Gwen gave a swift nod. I think I better stay here. But have a good time and take lots of pictures on your phone for me, will you? I nodded. Of course. Gwen and Eloise drifted off together, speaking in hushed tones. What was that all about? I asked Hayward once they were out of earshot.
Oh, I shouldn't expect it to be much of a true emergency, Lady Scarlet. There's been rumors circulating of some kind of ghost hunter in the area. Gwen has her whole support group on high guard, looking for the scoundrel.
A ghost hunter? I repeated. I'd been given the title a time or two, though it wasn't an accurate description of what I did. I rarely had to go looking for ghosts. They were all too happy to come and find me.
I don't know much about it, Hayward replied. But this woman is in town, and according to her Webster, she's looking for spirits.
My nose crinkled. Webster? Like a dictionary? Flapjack gave a long-suffering sigh. The old coot means webisode. The so-called ghost hunter has a vlog. You know, a video blog. Oh, good grief, not another one. We'd run into a similar situation months back during a visit to New Orleans with a self-proclaimed medium who'd garnered fame and fortune by duping people into believing he could connect them with lost loved ones.
Not to worry, Lady Scarlet. My darling Gwen has the matter quite in hand,
Hayward said, a prideful puff to his chest. Flapjack made a gagging noise. Aren't they adorable? The Duke and Duchess of Casperville. Hayward's pleased smile drooped.
That's Lord and Lady, he corrected. Oh, my apologies, Your Grace. Please, may you find it in your deep and merciful heart to spare my life,
Flapjack mocked, borrowing Hayward's Oxford accent. Will you two please knock it off? I growled, stepping onto the sidewalk. Lucas is waiting for me. Hayward, can you go with Gwen and make sure she doesn't get herself into trouble? I don't like the sound of this ghost hunter. Especially, I added to myself, since Gwen was hiding the whole thing from me. Aw, shucks, Flapjack said with a grin at his top-hatted nemesis. Looks like you won't be able to do that toilet inspection after all. You must be devastated. Flapjack, I snapped, a little too loudly. A few yards away, a cluster of people at the bus stop turned to look at me. My cheeks warmed, and I offered a strange wave before running the rest of the way across the lot to Lucas's SUV. I slipped into the front passenger seat, and Lucas smiled at me from behind the wheel. He handed me a coffee cup. Vanilla latte for the bride-to-be. My heart fluttered. I'm still not used to that, I said before taking a sip. The latte was tepid. Sorry it took me so long to get down here. Ghost trouble. Lucas grinned. Aha. Make sure he knows it was Hayward, Flapjack said. I craned around to peek in the back seat at the preening ghost cat. I'm going to assume we have a stowaway, Lucas said, easing the vehicle onto the street. I'll give you one guess, I replied before buckling myself in. Flapjack? He's a bit clingy, isn't he? Flapjack looked up from his grooming and fired a half-hearted hiss in Lucas's direction. He wants to see the wedding venue. I straightened in my seat and flipped down the mirrored visor. Yikes! I took my hair down and tried, mostly unsuccessfully, to untangle my copper-red locks. It looks like I stuck my finger in a socket. You look beautiful, Lucas said, placing a reassuring hand on my thigh. As always. Flapjack snorted. You'd better appreciate that delusion while you can, Scar. It'll only last another year or so. Gee, thanks. Lucas looked over at me. What, I can't compliment you anymore? I realized the mix-up and frowned. No, sorry. I was talking to Flapjack. Lucas bobbed his head. Right. I sighed. Thank you. For the compliment, I mean. What's a fiancé for? He teased. So I know it's early and you're only one sip into your morning coffee, but have you given any more thought to my suggestion for the holidays? My mom called again this morning while I was waiting in line. A wave of dread washed over me, and I slumped down in my seat. Not really. I don't want to pressure you, Scar, but if we're going to buy the plane tickets, we really can't wait much longer. They're going to be pricey enough as it is. I know. I exhaled slowly. I'll call my parents and see what they think. Lucas slid a sideways glance at me as we rolled to a stop sign. I don't think it will be the disaster you've got pictured in your head, babe, he said with a smile. I reached for his chin, cradling it between my thumb and forefinger. And I think your optimism is bordering on delusional. He barked out a laugh, and I smiled. It's just a family gathering. What's the worst that could happen? Famous last words, Green. Chapter 2. I finished my latte and a blueberry scone and was starting to feel more alive by the time the GPS announced the destination was ahead on the left. The Rosewood Chapel was tucked away on a hillside about 20 miles outside Beechwood Harbor. I'd found it on a wedding planning website featuring nature-inspired venues. I'd never spent a lot of time imagining my wedding, but in the glimmers of ideas I'd collected over the years, I saw myself barefoot on a beach, or standing under an archway of flowers somewhere in the middle of the forest. However, in the beginning of our wedding talks, Lucas informed me that his mother was a religious woman and would be mortified if we weren't married in a church by an official minister. The Rosewood Chapel was something of a compromise. The quaint chapel wasn't an ornate church with organ music and large oil paintings depicting scenes from the Bible, but it had stained glass windows and a pulpit, which I assumed would be good enough for Mrs. Green. Lucas slowed down and flipped on his blinker when we spotted a weathered wooden sign marking a gravel driveway. "I guess this is the place," he said, leaning over the steering wheel as we crept up the steep incline. "Does this seem right to you?" "I told you it was rustic," I replied with a slight shrug. He frowned. "Uh-huh." I patted his arm. "It'll be worth it." "Yeah, if he doesn't pop a tire," Flapjack complained from the back seat. I twisted around and scowled at him. "What did I say about the peanut gallery? I don't even know why you're so insistent on tagging along." "What else was I going to do today? The fish market's already closed, and Holly's not working at the coffee shop anymore, so there's no point in going over there anymore. It's not fun if there isn't anyone to harass. And the dentist took out their giant aquarium, so I don't even have that left to entertain me anymore. This town's dull, Scar. When are we moving to Seattle?" I scoffed and turned back around in my seat. "What's up?" Lucas asked. "Flapjack is bored. He wants to know when we're moving to Seattle." Lucas glanced at the rearview mirror, though he couldn't actually see the disgruntled feline. "Not soon enough, little buddy." "Little buddy?" Flapjack repeated with more than a hint of disdain. "What am I? The kid in one of those stupid rom-com movies you and Hayward like so much? Does he think he's some kind of potential stepdad and he's going to win me over by dragging me to baseball games and calling me Sport and Lil Rascal? Ugh," he sighed. "How insufferable." "Might want to nix that particular nickname," I muttered to Lucas. "You're not scoring any points." Lucas chuckled, a bemused look on his face. "You know, when I imagined getting married, I never imagined having to win over a deceased cat's approval. I thought dealing with the soon-to-be father-in-law would be the big battle." "Remind him I like fish," Flapjack said. "A couple of cans of albacore and all is forgiven." The canopy of pine trees gave way to a small clearing, and the pristine white chapel appeared. Well-tended flower beds flowed out from the front steps and wrapped around the chapel. A round stained glass window was inlaid above the double doors, featuring white roses and a pair of doves. A steeple with a bell tower extended up into the sky above, reaching for the ancient evergreens. Lucas blinked. "Whoa, this isn't what I expected." I smiled at him. "Told you it would be worth the drive." He smiled at me before pulling into one of the parking spaces in front of the chapel. After sharing a quick kiss, much to Flapjack's chagrin, we climbed out of the SUV. The woods enveloping the chapel were near soundless, the silence only broken by the twittering of birds and the distant sounds of the ocean. And Flapjack. "Nice place," he said, floating through the side of the SUV to stand beside me. "Want me to check the bathroom situation?" He chuckled to himself and strode off toward the chapel's front doors. Lucas came around the front bumper and reached for my hand. Warmth wrapped around my heart as we stood together, thinking about our wedding day, and I knew that the moment would be captured and stored in my memories forever. "It's kind of perfect, isn't it?" I breathed. Lucas squeezed my hand. The right door opened, and a tall, lanky man dressed in chinos and a blue dress shirt stepped out onto the porch. He held up a hand and offered a friendly smile. "Miss Sanderson and Mr. Green?" "That's us," Lucas said, looking at me with a smile that warmed me all the way to my toes. Emotion swelled in my throat, and I smiled through watery eyes. Thankfully, Flapjack was out of sight and couldn't heckle me for going to pieces.
"Pastor Micah Lawrence," the minister said. "It's very nice to meet you both."
Lucas led the way, and we both exchanged a handshake with the minister.
"You came on a good day," Pastor Micah said. "This time of year I find the weather often scares away potential couples."
Somehow I couldn't imagine finding the secluded chapel any less charming, even if it were dumping buckets.
"Well, come on inside,"
the pastor said, waving us toward the front doors.
"I'll take you on the grand tour. Remind me, what date were you hoping for?"
Well, we haven't really decided, I answered, but we're leaning towards something in early September. The pastor gave a warm smile as he pulled the door open.
"As long as you're not looking for June, we should be able to work something out."
I laughed. I hear ya. I'm a florist. There's no way I could try to sneak away from my own wedding smack dab in the middle of wedding season.
"Oh, well, I guess that's one thing to check off your list," Pastor Micah replied. "Handy, being able to do your own flowers."
I nodded, but words escaped me as we crossed the threshold and a wave of memories to be surged over me, wrapping me in a real-life movie, one snapshot after the other. Lucas, standing on the end of the aisle, handsome as ever in a dark blue suit and a crisp white shirt. His two brothers standing at his side, their hands clasped together in front of them. The music would swell from the string quartet off to the other side. Our family and friends, all commingled in the white pews, would stand as one as I'd start my journey toward Lucas, toward I do, toward forever.
"Scarlett? Babe, you okay?"
Lucas asked quietly. I nodded, my throat clogged. Lucas draped an arm around my waist and pulled me to his side. "Well, I don't want to jump the gun here, but I've only seen this look in her eyes a couple times before. Any chance you can take a credit card for the deposit?" Pastor Micah chuckled softly.
"I'll go get the official calendar. Feel free to look around."
The pastor hummed a cheery tune to himself as he headed for a side door. I turned to face Lucas. "Are you serious about the deposit? I mean, we haven't even looked anywhere else yet." "We can keep looking for as long as you'd like," he said with a laugh. "But I'd like to think I know you well enough to say that you've already got your heart set on this place." "Well, what about you? What do you think?" Lucas opened his mouth, but Flapjack spoke first. "It's a little cramped, but hey, if you're not interested in maximizing your present potential, I guess you can keep the guest list small." "I think it's a good mix of natural beauty and tradition," Lucas said, his words half mixed with Flapjack's. "It's a church. That should keep my mom off my back. And it's small enough we can keep it intimate and blame the venue if anyone complains about getting cut from the guest list." Flapjack scoffed. "Fine, but you can kiss that gourmet waffle maker goodbye." "Flapjack thinks we should have a big wedding so we can get lots of presents," I said, serving as translator. Lucas chuckled. "Considering the house prices in Seattle, we're likely going to need to keep things a little minimalist." I smiled. "I'm more concerned about how fast your head is going to explode when we try to blend my collection with your whole mod contemporary motif." Despite his years working as the head of security on a popular home design TV show, Lucas's bachelor pad had a shocking lack of warmth. He preferred sleek, clean lines and kept an official kibosh on knickknacks. I, on the other hand, had a collection of who's-its and what's-its that would make Ariel eat her Little Mermaid heart out. "Do you really love it, though?" I asked, taking one more spin to drink in all the little details of the chapel. The wooden support beams were stained a dark walnut, providing contrast to the mostly white interior. Natural light flooded the entire space from the large round windows along both side walls. A rainbow of colors danced at our feet from the stained glass above the doors. The altar was simple, a single step up from the rest of the floor. A wooden pulpit sat firmly in the middle, and a well-worn piano stood to the left. 3 more stained glass windows dotted the wall above the altar. And wait. No. Flapjack chuckled. "Did you see her?" Something, or rather, someone, skittered past the front row of pews and disappeared into the opposite wall. My stomach sank. Of course. Why wouldn't the wedding chapel have a resident ghost? "She's not the chatty type," Flapjack told me, coming to stand beside me. "I found her in the bridal suite and asked her name. She ignored me. Or maybe she's deaf. Is that a thing? Deaf ghosts?
Was there a particular weekend in September? The pastor asked, his voice echoing slightly in the large space. So far, we have the weekend of the 18th and the 25th open. The first 2 weekends are booked, unless you'd like to do a Friday evening. I tore my eyes off the place in the wall where the ghost had vanished and forced a smile.
Well, we aren't really... I think we wanted a Saturday afternoon, Lucas said at the same time. He stopped and looked at me, a flicker of concern in his green eyes. Right? Well, yes, ideally, but do we... I stuttered, and then looked at the pastor with an apologetic smile. Sorry, Pastor. It's just that this is the first venue we've looked at. Well, the first anything we've looked at for the wedding. We're still getting things nailed down, I guess.
That's perfectly all right,
he replied. He closed the leather folio and tucked it under one arm.
Did you have any questions for me? I could show you the bride and groom suites. There's a restroom here on the main floor and then another downstairs. It's Jack and Jill style, between the bride and groom rooms. We typically send the groom to the upstairs restroom if you're trying to avoid seeing one another before the ceremony begins. Of course, the traditions seem to change all the time. More and more couples are opting for a private photography session before their guests even arrive.
Pastor Micah shrugged.
To each their own, I suppose.
The good news is the bathroom up here is pretty nice, Flapjack said as he tailed us. I'm sure even Sir Stuffy Pants will approve. I'd like to see the bridal suite, I said, ignoring the cat. Pastor Micah led us downstairs to the daylight basement and showed us the bridal suite. It wasn't fancy, but it was bright and clean, painted in a soft, almost pearlescent pink. A three-way mirror stood at one end, a cream love seat at the other. A long table sat under the skinny window and had a couple cosmetic-type mirrors with built-in lights, designating it as the hair and makeup station. It's very nice, I told the pastor with a polite smile. Would I be able to stash stuff here the night before, after the rehearsal?
Of course. Bring anything you like. We even have a couple of fridges in the storage room if you'd like to bring in lunch or snacks. We do have a no-alcohol policy, though. I hope that's not a problem.
Flapjack snickered. You hear that, Scar? A full 48 hours of your mother, and no booze allowed. Mental note to self. Buy a flask sometime between now and September. A big one. Lucas poked his head into the room and took a quick look around. This is nice. Mm-hmm, I hummed, nodding.
Where are you thinking of holding the reception? Pastor Micah asked. We do have a small banquet room down the hall. We use it for church potlucks, and the women's group has a bunco night once a month.
Are there any other venues nearby? I asked. I'd hate to ask our guests to travel too far. What do other couples usually do? Before the pastor could reply, the large framed picture of the chapel hanging over the love seat crashed to the floor, the glass shattering across the thin white carpet. The pastor jumped at the sound.
Oh, dear. Must have had a loose nail.
My eyes didn't move from the wall. It wasn't a loose nail that sent the frame crashing to the floor. No. That had to be the work of the grinning ghost bride, staring at me from the place on the wall where it had once hung. Great. Chapter 3.
Careful, Scarlet,
Lucas said, sweeping into action. He pulled me gently away from the pile of broken glass.
Shake off your feet to make sure none of the shards go into your shoes.
What's your problem, lady? Flapjack demanded of the ghost bride. The woman, who looked as though she'd died in her late 20s, fully came into the room and pointed menacingly at Lucas and me.
Them, she snapped. These happy, lovey-dovey couples come in here, stars in their eyes, talking about their perfect day. They've got no respect for the dead.
It took effort, but I resisted making dead-on eye contact with the woman, pretending that I was still upset about the picture falling from the wall. Let me guess, Flapjack drawled in a bored voice. You died on your wedding day, hence the over-frosted cupcake getup. And now you're hell-bent on making sure no one else can have their happily ever after as long as you're stuck here haunting this place. The bride glowered at Flapjack.
Who are you?
I'm the lovable sidekick in this little stage play, Flapjack replied calmly. Now let me tell you something. My friend Scarlet can send your silk-swaddled behind to the other world with the snap of her fingers. So I'd suggest you keep to yourself and let this particular happy couple go about their business. I bit down on my lower lip to keep from scolding the loud-mouthed cat. Is there a broom nearby? Lucas asked, squatting beside the shards of glass. He carefully plucked out a few of the larger pieces.
Oh, please, don't trouble yourself,
Pastor Micah said, swooping in to shoo Lucas away from the mess.
I'll take care of it.
Lucas pushed up to his feet and placed the shards he'd collected into the pastor's extended hand. Are you sure? The pastor shuffled out into the hall.
Yes, of course. Don't trouble yourself,
he called over his shoulder.
Your friend doesn't scare me,
the bride told Flapjack, swooping into the room. She folded her arms and scowled at the Himalayan.
I've been here for 2 years, and guess what? Not one bride has gone through with her wedding. I've scared them all off.
What? That couldn't be right. The pastor just told us the books were nearly full for the following summer. Even in September, our desired month, he was down to 2 weekends. Not to mention all the splashy wedding photographs I'd seen on the chapel's website prior to reserving a walkthrough. Were those photos all 2+ years old? Well, Scarlet and Lucas aren't going to fall for your little parlor tricks, okay? Flapjack told the bride defiantly. So best to give it up and move on. I smiled at his defensiveness. I only appreciated his sassy side when it was pointed in someone else's direction. Lucas looked at me, his brow creased. I gave the ghost a subtle nod. We've got company, I said, from one corner of my mouth, as the bride and cat continued their bickering. Here? He hissed. I nodded, and he started to swear under his breath, but quickly bit off the colorful words when the pastor poked his head back into the room.
I thought you might like to see these, he said, offering a small stack of colorful brochures. A few potential reception locations. These are all within 10 minutes, and of course you could always arrange for a shuttle bus or rental cars to ferry folks back and forth. If you book the wedding here, the parking lot can be yours all day.
That's very kind, I told him. I glanced at Flapjack, who was still squared off with the interloper, and then snapped my attention back to the pastor. Do you remember the Phelps wedding? I think they got married here this spring. Pastor Micah's eyes flashed, but he quickly nodded and plastered on a convincing smile.
Of course. They were a lovely couple. Are you a friend of theirs?
Co-workers, I replied sweetly, concealing a frown. If you give us a few more minutes, we could probably narrow down a date.
Oh, of course,
he said, backing out of the room. He bumped the door jamb and quickly sidestepped into the hall.
Take all the time you need. I'll be upstairs in my office. It's just off the entryway. You can't miss it. Come give a holler whenever you're ready.
He smiled and then hurried away. Okay, Lucas said when we were alone. What's going on? Who are the Phelps? I folded my arms. There are no Phelps. I made them up. Why? Lucas asked, a bewildered look on his face. To catch the pastor in a lie. Lucas blinked. What? So it's true? Flapjack asked the bride. You've really scared off all the other couples since your own ill-fated day?
That's right, she proudly replied. I'm doing them a favor, really. This place has a curse on it.
A curse? I repeated without thinking. The bride snapped to attention, staring at me with piercing silver eyes.
You heard me?
I already told you you're no match for her, Flapjack snorted. She knows all about ghosts, especially the nasty ones like you. I held up a hand. Flapjack, just do the magic, Scar. Send her cantankerous rear packing, permanently. The bride retreated a couple paces, till she was nearly about to slide right out of the basement.
Who are you?
Meet Scarlet, Flapjack answered, his furry chest puffing out. She's about to be your worst nightmare. Scarlet, what's going on? Lucas asked. There's a ghost here, I said quietly. She says this place is cursed, and it appears as though she's made it her mission to scare off potential couples from having their weddings here. But the pastor said... Exactly, I interrupted. He's lying. But why? I shook my head. I have no idea. Because he's in debt up to his eyeballs, the bride snapped. Or, more accurately, the church is. They depend on the money from holding weddings here to keep their other functions up and running. This scarcity tactic is a trick he learned from some wedding business consultant. He uses it to try and get you to book right now. And if you don't book today, he'll call you in a week and offer you some primo date at half price due to a cancellation. I narrowed my eyes at her. And you're actually proud of yourself for causing all this? I obviously don't know anything about you, but I can't imagine someone so miserable that their life's goal is to bankrupt a church. She scoffed. That's the problem with life goals. You have to be living to accomplish them. Why did you say this chapel is cursed? I asked. Did you have an accident on the day of your wedding? It wasn't an accident, the bride sneered. I was murdered. Flapjack smashed one ghost paw against his face. Here we go again. I drew in a slow breath. Well, unless you suspect Pastor Micah of killing you, it seems your anger and vengeance are a hair off target. I don't know who killed me, she admitted. That's the whole problem. Listen, I'm sorry to hear about what happened to you. It's awful, truly. But haunting your death place isn't the way to get closure and move from this plane to the next. You'd be better off figuring out what it is that's keeping you here. That's the only way to find peace and cross over to the other world. I'm not interested in going anywhere, she fired back. I see. My heart sank at the thought of saying goodbye to the beautiful chapel. But planning a wedding was stressful enough, without adding a murder mystery and manifesting ghost to the mix. Is there anything we can do to change your mind? I asked, having a feeling I already knew the answer. She leaned in, a sneer on her otherwise pretty face. You're more than welcome to book your wedding and make all of your plans, but consider yourself warned. I can do a lot more than rattle some art from the walls. Her parting shot fired, she winked out of the room. The lights flickered, and 2 bulbs in the hanging fixture above our heads exploded and went dark. Lucas tugged me closer. Let's get out of here. Flapjack swore under his breath. You sure know how to pick 'em, Scar. I should come with a caution sign, I muttered in agreement as I took Lucas's hand. We found the pastor and begged off making a solid booking. He seemed disappointed, but made sure we each had a copy of the chapel's office line and his personal cell phone to use when we were ready. I got the sense he was half a minute away from offering us the half-price special, just as the ghost bride had predicted, before Lucas ushered me out of the chapel and back to his SUV. All right, so what now? Are we nixing the chapel? Lucas asked, as he closed his door, enveloping us in a sudden silence. I stared at the chapel, and my stomach twisted. Everyone told me I'd get a gut feeling when the dress or the venue was the one. And the chapel was that. No question about it. No, I said, setting my jaw. We're not going to let her win, whoever she is. Or was, Lucas added in a solemn tone. I sighed. She said she was murdered on her wedding day. Obviously, she has every right to be angry, but she needs to find a more productive outlet. I tapped a finger against my lips, turning the wheels in my head. What about the whole, vanishing thing? Lucas asked. Couldn't you just nudge her along? I shifted my eyes toward him. You remember the part about the demon portal, right? Lucas scrubbed a hand over the light coating of stubble on his angular jawline. Well, yes, but we figured out how to avoid that last time. Not that long ago, I'd used my newfound powers to help, or what I thought was helping, a ghost cross over to the other world. What I hadn't realized was that there was something of a waiting room between this world and the next, and that spirits could be pushed into it if whatever unfinished business they had at the time of their death lingered on once they left this plane. Not only was that purgatory a psychologically damaging isolation, but there was also the chance a demon would find the weakness in the supernatural webbing connecting the 2 worlds and use it as a way to tunnel into the land of the living. I couldn't risk it again, especially not for something so selfish. I feel bad for the pastor, Lucas said. You could smell the desperation on him when we told him we'd call back after we looked at a few other venues. The bride ghost says she's been blocking the weddings for 2 years, and the church is going broke, I explained, leaning my head back against the seat. We've got to do something. I'm just not sure what. Seems solving her murder would be the best chance of getting her on her way to happily ever whatever, Lucas replied. We don't even know her name. Google is your friend, Flapjack chimed in from the back seat. How many murders do you think took place in that chapel? It's not exactly the setting of a King novel, is it? Lucas dug out his phone. It shouldn't be too hard to track down. He tapped at the screen. Or not. What? He flipped the phone around. No service. Let's get back to my place, I said, reaching for my seatbelt. We'll pick up some Thai food for an early lunch, and you can go all cyber sleuth while I call these reception halls. Lucas smiled and turned over the engine. I might need a couple extra spring rolls. You know, brain food. I laughed. Fair enough. Flapjack poked his head in between the seats. Which one of you is ordering the fish? Chapter 4. Gwen, Hayward, and Sturgeon, a retired Army sergeant ghost, were waiting for us when we arrived back to Lily Pond. Oh, great, Flapjack groaned. This can't be good. Oh, hush, Fluffball, Sturgeon complained at him. Why don't you head upstairs? I told Lucas, passing him the bag of takeout. Looks like I might need a few minutes. Lucas stared into the empty, to him, room, and then gave a knowing nod. Right. Well, don't take too long. For one, you know I can never find anything to watch on Netflix. And second, this stuff isn't great after a round through the microwave. I nodded, and he trooped off toward the back staircase that led to my apartment. All right, I said, when the door shut behind him. What's going on? I think we might need a little help with this ghost hunter situation, Gwen said, clasping her hands together in front of her. I know we're not supposed to bother you with this stuff anymore, but... That woman is a danger to all of us, Hayward bellowed, showing an uncharacteristic streak of impatience. Even Flapjack did a double take. I held out a hand, stopping just short of telling Hayward to take a breath. Okay, what happened? Start at the beginning. Gwen placed a hand on Hayward's forearm, temporarily settling him as she explained. Well, as you know, these so-called ghost hunters are rarely a legitimate concern. It's usually smoke and mirrors and weird technological tests that never work. But this time it's different. Scarlet, this woman seems to be the real McCoy. What makes you say that? I asked. She told us, and I quote, to buzz off, Hayward replied, his mustache twitching. I halfway expected his top hat to fly off his head and spin in a circle. Gwen flinched. She was at the library. According to my research... Gossip, Flapjack interrupted. Hayward bumped the feline in the rear and then looked to Gwen. She cleared her throat. She's here in Beechwood Harbor to write a book. We were trying to decide what to do about her when she turned, looked right at us, and told us we were bothering her. As far as proof went, that was about as crystal clear as it got. A book? Well, that doesn't sound too dangerous, I said, giving Hayward a wary look before adding, even if she was rude. Unforgivably, he agreed with an insistent nod. Flapjack snickered. She really got your medieval panties in a twist. I need to meet this woman. Not helping, I muttered at him. Not really my goal, he replied with a wink. I nudged the cat with my toes, and his eyes went wide. Fine. I'll go see if Lucas opened the shrimp yet, he muttered, floating up toward the ceiling. When his paws slipped from view, I refocused on Gwen and Hayward. I don't mean to be rude, but I'm not really sure I see the emergency here. What is it you want my help with? It's not just that she's rude, Sturgeon said. There's reports that she used salt on Mr. Collins. And an iron poker on Seraphina Wilson, Gwen added. So she's displacing ghosts? I asked. That was a little more problematic, though I still wasn't sure what the trio expected me to do. Can't you get rid of her? Gwen continued. Tell her there's only room for one ghost, person in town, and that it's you. Gwen, this isn't an old western, I said. I can't just shoo her out of town because she makes you uncomfortable. If you want my advice, just steer clear of her. Let her write her book, and then she'll leave. What if she writes about us? Hayward asked. That's what you're worried about? That she'll include you in her book? We don't even know if this book she's writing is about ghosts, do we? The three ghosts exchanged an unsure glance. Guys, listen, I get it. No one likes feeling watched or spied on, but there's really no need to panic. Sturgeon's rugged face tensed.
That's easy for you to say. You're not the one being swiped at with pokers and salt shakers.
Again, easily remedied by giving her some breathing room, I replied, straining to keep my frustration in check. Between Flapjack's complaints, the Bridezilla ghost, and this new ghost hunter, I was about at my daily limit for spectral squabbles. Sturgeon grunted.
Some help you are. First you foist the support group off onto Gwen without notice, and now you're dodging this call to arms. And to think I used to look at you as one of us.
Sturgeon, that's not... He blinked out of sight. Fair, I finished with a deflated sigh. Gwen and Hayward stared at me, their expressions somewhere between offended and confused. I'll see what I can do, okay? I told them. Gwen looped her arm through Hayward's. Don't bother, Gwen said, her tone icier than I'd ever heard it. We'll handle this ourselves. We aren't wholly without options, you know? Before I could ask what she had in mind, the pair vanished. What was that all about? Lucas asked when I slammed the front door of the apartment behind me. He'd spread the takeout containers across my battered second-hand coffee table and was rooting through one of the white boxes with a pair of chopsticks. Ghost emergency? Something like that, I grumbled, sinking down to the floor at the other end of the table. I followed my nose and found the box of pad thai. The local ghosts are in a Chicken Little type of mood. I swear this happens every winter. The tourists are gone, people stay indoors, and the ghosts get restless and bored and start inventing things to freak out about. Lucas chuckled. Well, assuming we can find a house and a wedding venue, not necessarily in that order. This will be your last winter. He handed me the remote. Here, I'm coming up empty. I sighed and leaned back against the couch. Balancing the box of food in my lap, I started flipping through the carousel of Netflix options. Maybe we should look into other venues. Really? Lucas replied, sounding skeptical. I set the remote down on the coffee table and sighed. I want our wedding to be perfect. We're only planning on doing this thing once, and I don't want to risk it getting sabotaged. Believe me, I've dealt with a Bridezilla ghost, and it's not an experience I'm looking to repeat anytime soon. Preferably never. It's not like you to give up so easily, Lucas said. There wasn't any judgment in his tone, but my reaction clearly surprised him. Especially when the ghost in question was met with a violent end. Those are usually the ones you rush right into. Head first, brakes off. I grabbed the remote again and circled back through the movie selection before finally settling on one we'd seen before. The opening credits kicked on, and I set the remote aside. I'm turning over a new leaf, remember? I told Lucas as I picked up my chopsticks. As you just said, we're house hunting, planning a wedding, and I've got to figure out what to do with Lily Pond. Adding a murder investigation to the mix doesn't seem like the brightest idea. When Lucas didn't reply, I craned around to look up at him from my place on the floor. He was grinning at me like the Cheshire Cat. What? I asked. You don't believe me? He shook his head, his grin widening. Not for a second. I wrinkled my nose at him and then turned my attention back to my meal with an insistent, humph. Lucas chuckled. We can look at some more places if that's what you want to do. But before we make those plans, I think we need to sort out what we want to do next month. I dropped my head back against the couch cushion with a groan. You're insufferable sometimes. You know that, right? Laughing softly, Lucas ran his fingers through my hair. That may be, but it doesn't change the fact that you know I'm right. Yeah, I grumbled. I'm trying not to stall forever. I'm trying to be the voice of reason. I waved at the TV. I could pull up half a dozen movies right now that would prove my point that having the in-laws meet is a terrible idea. Lucas laughed. You're basing your decision on chick flicks and rom-coms? I peered at him. Maybe. He took a bite of spring roll, still smiling, and then nodded. I see. Well, as long as you've done your research. I sighed dramatically and put the pad thai back on the table before spinning around to face him. I like your parents. They're laid back and real. And what? You think your parents will scare them off? More specifically, my mother, I muttered. Your mom is fine, Lucas insisted. I mean, sure, she's a little snobby, I inserted. I was going to say particular, Lucas finished. It's particular when she refuses to stay in a motel. It crosses over into snobby when she makes my dad call 5 different hotels to compare thread counts before booking. Lucas's grand idea for the holidays was to book a hotel in a central location and have everyone fly in, so we could all spend the week of Christmas together. Our families were flung across the country and thus far hadn't all had a chance to meet. I just think next year would be better, I added. There's hardly any time to plan. The flights and hotels are going to be crazy expensive this last minute. Lucas gave me a, and whose fault is that, look. He'd been pitching the idea since we got engaged at the end of the summer, but I'd put him off every time he tried to pin down a solid plan. I grabbed for his free hand and pled my case. Next winter we'll be married and have our own house. Maybe then we could have everyone come here, or, well, to Seattle, I mean. So you want the first time everyone meets to be the week of the wedding? Lucas asked. I wasn't sure how to answer the question. There were too many variables. If we waited to make the introductions on the night of the rehearsal dinner, there was less time for people, aka my mother, to get on everyone's nerves. But it also seemed a little risky. If any serious drama arose, there wouldn't be time to contain it before the wedding, and the lingering tension would have the potential to cast a shadow over the celebratory day. I sighed. Maybe we could have some kind of engagement party in the spring. We could rent the banquet room at the Lilac House and hire a caterer. My mother's been nagging me to bring you home to Arizona for months, most likely so she can trot us out to all of her high society friends. I'll tell her we want to have the engagement party here instead, then your parents and brothers can fly in too. Lucas rooted around in his takeout box. Why don't you want me to go with you to Arizona? He asked, without looking up. It's not that I don't want to take you home, I said. It's that I don't want to go home. It would just be a dog and pony show for my mother's rich friends, and I don't actually care about any of those people. I barely know their names. Honestly, if you've met one, you've met them all. The whole evening would be vapid and obnoxious. I paused and looked down at my engagement ring. The cushion-cut emerald was framed by natural diamonds, all set in a yellow-gold band. It was perfect for me. But it was far from the 3-carat cushion-cut perfection that my mother's friends would expect. They'd all smile politely while admiring it, only to turn away and murmur about how my poor fiancé must not have the funds to buy a diamond. It had been that way my entire life. I'd grown up going to the types of restaurants that had a coat check and valet service, cocktail parties where the children were all shuffled off to another wing of the house to be monitored by a paid attendant for the evening to make sure we were neither seen nor heard. It wasn't the life I wanted for myself, and it certainly wasn't an experience I wanted to drag Lucas through. He could handle it, I had no doubt about that. If I asked him, he'd don a dark suit, smile, and carry on politely. He could deliver a perfect toast and get the crowd on his side, even if they silently chided his off-the-rack suit and commented amongst themselves about my ring. But he shouldn't have to. If we're going to take time away from work, I'd rather it be somewhere special for the two of us, I told him. My parents are better when they're away from their posh little bubble, that's all. Lucas glanced up from his meal. He didn't look completely convinced, but I knew he'd drop it. All right, we'll have Christmas here, just you and me, and host something in the spring. And by then, the wedding planning will be well underway, I added brightly. Maybe we'll even have a house under contract. Speaking of, Lucas said, leaning forward to exchange one takeout container for another, I have an appointment with that new real estate agent on Tuesday. We sticking with the same budget parameters? Yeesh, no softballs tonight, huh? I said with a tired laugh. Yeah, I think we keep all the search stuff the same, but let them know we're willing to go a little deeper into suburbia if need be. Lucas nodded. Agreed. I shifted my attention to the movie I'd selected and realized I had no idea what the characters were talking about or anything about the plot. With a heavy sigh, I reached for the remote and navigated through the menu to whatever episode of Friends we'd left off on. I can't get into a movie right now, I said, putting the remote down as the familiar laugh track sounded. I'm ready to slip off into a food coma and pretend I don't know anything about haunted wedding chapels or the real estate market in Seattle. Lucas chuckled and patted the couch beside him. "Come on up here," he said with a smile. "You can use my shoulder as a pillow." Laughing, I climbed off the floor and settled beside him, exhaling the stress away as my cheek found the perfect resting place. Best offer I've had all day. Chapter 5. How was the tour? I sighed at the question and dropped my purse on the front counter. I'd spent my lunch break across town, visiting the small Baptist church to see if it had any potential as a wedding venue. Well, let's see. The maroon carpet and the mothball smell were kind of a turnoff. But on the plus side, the older-than-Methuselah pastor said he wouldn't charge extra if we opted for the deluxe wedding package. They'd be able to get the organ tuned and maybe even talk Deacon Bruno into accompanying it with his electric harp. Yikes. Lizzie Hartwell, my full-time assistant, cringed. That's a really depressing silver lining. Yeah. I dug in my purse and grabbed a granola bar that had sunk to the depths. The whole thing is turning into a nightmare, I said, tearing off a corner of the plastic packaging. I'm halfway tempted to move this whole thing to Seattle just to have options. I've seen every church in a 10-mile radius, and none of them have even come close to being workable. Well, except Rosewood, Lizzie interjected. I frowned and bit off half the granola bar. I don't get it, she continued as I chewed. You were gushing about that place before you went to see it. What was so wrong that you had to give it up entirely? Lizzie was blissfully unaware of my special power and had no idea she worked surrounded by a myriad of spirits on any given day. There were times it was nearly impossible to keep her in the dark, and she'd overheard more than a few hushed conversations that I had to poorly cover up with some lame excuse. If anything, she thought I was a little nuts, but my real secret went undiscovered. Lucas was the only person in my life who knew about my strange gift, at least outright. There had been an article about my skills in the local paper a while back, but most people brushed it off without a second thought. Only the supernaturals knew the truth. It was just a vibe thing, I said casually, tucking away the rest of the granola bar. Did that shipment of roses come in while I was out? The nearest flower market was quite a drive outside town, so unless I needed something last minute, I tended to have flowers shipped directly to the store. It did, Lizzie answered, gesturing toward the studio space at the back of the shop. I just started working on the second box. Great, I can take over if you want to go to lunch. Lizzie went to the back, and I followed. She grabbed her winter coat from the pegs by the back door, and I hung my purse up on an empty peg. You want me to bring anything back for you from McNally's? It's grocery day, and the fridge was bare this morning. Oh, don't worry about me, I replied. Lizzie planted a hand on her hip. You have something besides half a granola bar? Yes, Mother, I sassed, though my rumbling stomach disagreed. I've got some leftover casserole upstairs. I'll put a note on the front door and run up there to nuke it. I can wait, Lizzie offered. I waved her off. No, get going. It won't take me long. Lizzie left through the back door, and I knew she'd come back with half a sandwich and an extra order of fries, claiming that she just couldn't eat another bite and insisting that I finish it up for her. She was thoughtful and also had a little bit of a stubborn streak. Sure enough, I was finishing up the last of the prep work when she came back in, holding a grease-splotched paper bag. I always order too much, she told me, holding up the bag. Half a Mediterranean veggie wrap and some fries, if you're interested. I smiled to myself and bobbed my head. Thanks, Lizzie. She placed the leftovers on the workbench beside my stack of roses and then circled back to shrug out of her coat. While I was waiting for my order, I called my cousin Margaret. She got married last summer, and I thought she might have some ideas for you. Turns out the Rosewood was her top choice, too. I mean, they'd put down a deposit and everything. And then, a few weeks before, they went to take measurements of the reception space to see how many tables they could fit. And I guess some really weird stuff happened. I held my breath. She says a light bulb burned out and then power for the entire place went out. She swears she heard a voice and the room got really cold. Get this, she thinks the place is haunted. Lizzie guffawed. I had no idea she believed in stuff like that. My own cousin. Can you imagine? Flapjack winked into view. Yes, just imagine. That does sound really strange, I answered casually, using a pocket knife to shear thorns off the rose in my hands. I guess the pastor said it was some kind of weather anomaly, but Margaret called it off. Anyway, they ended up getting married at McCord Lighthouse instead. Have you looked there yet? I shook my head. No, Lucas's mother is set on a church of some variety. We'll keep looking. Lizzie grabbed for one of the empty cardboard boxes and slashed the tape with a box cutter. How many people are you thinking of inviting? Not too many, I replied, pausing my work long enough to snag a French fry from the McNally's bag. 100? Maybe 120. I really don't want it to get too big. Flapjack snorted. Good luck telling Lynn that. My mother likely has other ideas. I sighed, agreeing with the cat. She's already started campaigning for us to have the wedding in Arizona so she can invite all of her rich friends. Lizzie smiled. That happened to my friend Babs. Her mom is a clown and wanted her to invite the whole circus. Flapjack cocked his head. I laughed. That's one way of putting it, though my mother would take umbrage if I told her she was trying to turn my wedding into a circus. Oh, Lizzie said. I meant literally. Bab's mom does birthday parties and works with a traveling carnival company. Flapjack snorted and rolled over to his back, his eyes going wide when a sparkling reflection bounced off my watch and danced along the ceiling. Well, in that case, I just hope her mom left the big red shoes and rainbow wig at home on the day of the wedding, I joked. Lizzie smiled and reached for the next empty box. I think if I ever get married, I'll do it on the beach. I used to want a big, fancy wedding, but now I think I'd rather spend the money on a long honeymoon and go somewhere really exotic. Where are you and Lucas thinking of going? Actually, for us, that's an even harder decision to make than any of the wedding stuff. I laughed. Just when we think we've made up our mind, one of us dissents and picks a new place. Let's just say my Pinterest page has way more travel tips than wedding ones at this point. I'm still voting for Hawaii, Flapjack said, his eyes still tracing the sparkle on the ceiling as I stripped rose stems and placed the cut flowers into their appropriate buckets. Fresh fish everywhere you go. I rolled my eyes. I'd told him half a dozen times that he wasn't invited on the honeymoon, but he was lingering in denial for the time being. I'd lock him, Hayward, and Gwen in a salt-lined room if I had to. Several months ago, they'd followed me to New Orleans against my wishes. In the end, I'd needed their help, but my honeymoon was the absolute line in the metaphorical, and potentially literal, sand. Speaking of a little romance, I segued with a wiggle of my eyebrows, what's going on with you and Bryant? Lizzie laughed off the question, but she couldn't hide the pink twinge on her fair complexion. Oh, there's not much to tell. Come on, I prodded. I'm a soon-to-be old married lady. I have to start living vicariously through all my single friends. Trust me, you've got the better deal. Dating is so frustrating. Lizzie shook her head. She was in her mid-20s and living in a tiny town with a population that generally skewed older. Her pickings were slim, and she told me in the past she wasn't interested in doing long-distance or anything involving an app. I thought I saw you two out at McNally's a few nights ago, I said, hoping I hadn't accidentally struck a nerve. I was going to wave, but I didn't want to interrupt what looked like a pretty serious conversation. Lizzie sighed and planted one hand on the workbench. We were, but only because he wanted to discuss us, and I was trying to change the topic. I wish you had interrupted, to be honest. Her answer surprised me. Bryant worked at the local hardware store, and by all accounts was a nice young man. I knew Lizzie was attracted to him, and they'd been seeing one another off and on for a couple months. I hadn't been expecting a ring to crop up on her finger anytime soon, but it seemed like things were headed somewhere. Bryant's really nice and he's cute, but I don't know, she said, trailing off for a moment as her gaze fixed on the fragrant blooms that filled the space between us. No chemistry? I asked. The opposite, actually. Lizzie's cheeks flushed. Sometimes I think that's all we have. Oh. Flapjack let out a cat call. I scowled at him. For as much as he teased Hayward about his soap operas and occasional Cosmopolitan article, he sure seemed to enjoy being steeped in the drama. Maybe Gwen was rubbing off on both of them. Great. He doesn't like to read or go to museums or anything like that, Lizzie continued. He likes sports and barbecuing and woodworking. And it's not that I think we need to have everything in common, but the more time we spend together, the more obvious it becomes that we don't have anything in common. He wants to call me his girlfriend and introduce me to his parents, but I'm not sure it's a good idea. I smiled. But you don't want to walk away completely because he's fun in other ways? Lizzie's cheeks went another shade of pink, and she hurried to grab for another box I'd emptied. Lizzie, you're young and having fun. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you want my advice, you don't want to lead him on, especially when it sounds like he's on a different... A loud bang sounded from the front of the shop, and I quickly set aside my knife and rushed out to inspect. The front door was rigged with a soft chime, so I'd know when a customer entered the store, even if I was alone and busy working in the back. We hadn't had a customer all morning. "What was that?" Lizzie asked, following after me. The retail space was empty. No one, human or ghost, was there. But in the middle of the room, to the right of a wire-spinning rack that held a variety of greeting cards, shards of pottery were piled from a broken flower pot made to hold African violets. "How did that get all the way over here?" Lizzie said, sidestepping me to begin cleaning up the mess. "I don't know," I said slowly, narrowing my eyes as I scanned the room. Lily Pond wasn't a huge shop. The retail space was a couple 100 square feet and neatly organized. There wasn't room for someone to hide, even a small child. Still, I walked the perimeter, weaving around the different display racks to double-check. "No one's here," I said, after peeking under the front counter with the cash register and assortment of knickknacks. "I think I got it all," Lizzie said, coming to join me. She held up the broken shards of pottery. "Here's the sticker so you can take it out of inventory." I couldn't help but smile. In her early days, Lizzie had garnered a reputation as a butterfinger and broke more than her fair share of vases and various gift items. As it turned out, she'd simply been nervous about trying to learn everything, and once she passed her first few months, she loosened up, and ironically, her grip tightened. "I got it," I said, tapping at the keyboard to wake the computer up. With a few clicks of the mouse, I adjusted the inventory to account for the broken vase. Lizzie dumped the broken pieces in the trash. "The customer must have misplaced the vase, maybe left it too close to the edge of the display." I nodded, even as my brain reached around for a better theory. For people like Lizzie, it was easier to rationalize things like that as a simple accident. Strange? Sure, but nothing outside the realm of possibility. I, on the other hand, knew all too well about the things that go bump in the night and the unseen forces at work in the world. I'd stopped believing in coincidence a long time ago. And as far as freak accidents, well, let's just say they were more likely to involve an actual supernatural freak than just an unexplainable phenomenon. Currently, though, I couldn't think of any suspect for the breakage. Since turning the ghost support group over to Gwen, I hadn't had any problems with random ghosts accosting me on the street demanding my help. It was actually strange to not be in high demand for once. So who, or what, had come into the shop to break the flower pot? And more importantly, why? "You know what I'm in the mood for all of a sudden?" I said, digging under the counter for my purse. "A mocha. You want something? On me?" Lizzie perked. "Sure. You want me to run out for it?" "Would you mind?" I asked, retrieving a $20 bill from my wallet. "Not at all," Lizzie replied, already going for her coat. "I'll take these boxes out to the recycle bin, too." "You're a gem." A few minutes later, Lizzie was bundled up and loaded down with a stack of folded cardboard. I held the back door open for her and she squeezed out, the cardboard scratching against the wall as she went. "Thanks," I called after her as she stepped out from the eaves and into the light sprinkle of rain. Scar?" I turned at Flapjack's voice and nearly ran face first into the bride ghost from the wedding chapel. My heart skyrocketed into my throat as I jumped back, banging into the metal door I'd just closed. "Man alive! What are you doing here?" "I'm here to make a deal," she replied sharply. I glanced past her as Flapjack floated down from his perch and stalked closer. I wasn't entirely sure what he could do if things came down to some kind of ghost-to-ghost combat, but I appreciated his fuzzy backup all the same. Crossing my arms, I narrowed my eyes and pretended my heart wasn't still slamming itself against my sternum. "What kind of deal?" "You want to get married at my chapel," she said. I saw it in your eyes." "Your chapel?" My brows lifted. She didn't back down from the claim. Clearly, in her mind, she was some kind of ghost bouncer, and I'd been deemed unfit to pass through to the other side of the velvet ropes. "Listen," I continued, "I like the chapel, but I'm perfectly capable of finding another venue." "Is that so?" the ghost asked. "I was watching you, you know. I saw that weak-in-the-knees, starry-eyed look on your face." "If you want help, you're going to have to ask for it," Flapjack told the woman, his tone still hostile as he came around to sit beside my feet. "No one likes the demanding princess of the universe types." The ghost considered his words with a glower, but when she lifted her eyes back to mine, they lost some of the fire. "Fine. I'm here to ask for help." "What made you change your mind?" I asked. "A week ago you seemed quite content to continue your reign of terror." "I guess something you said struck me. I know there's no future here for me," she replied quietly. "I'd like to move on, to whatever is next. And according to your nasty little cat, you can do that for me." "Nasty?" Flapjack hissed at her. "Lady, you haven't seen nasty yet." "Flapjack," I said gently. The cat plopped back on his haunches, but kept his narrowed eyes locked on the bride. "I can't snap my fingers and send you over to the other world. At least, not in good conscience," I told the ghost. "You're going to have to figure out what's holding you here, in this plane. I can help you try to unravel that, but ultimately I can't determine when it's your time to cross over." The ghost scoffed and threw her hands into the air. "I should have known this was a waste of time." "Good thing you have an endless amount of it to burn," Flapjack quipped under his breath. "You little—" The ghost lunged for him. I grabbed the handle of the small iron omelet pan I kept under the front counter. "Stop it right now," I bellowed, brandishing the pan like a sword. "Both of you." The ghost bride blinked, momentarily distracted by me, and Flapjack used the split second to finish his attack. He slashed and scratched at the woman's legs, the two semi-transparent silhouettes merging into a slight blur at the points of contact. The bride screeched and kicked out at the Himalayan. I brought the pan down in an arc, and two soft pops sounded before the ghosts melted out of view. Chapter 6. Flapjack came flying through the ceiling 15 minutes later, spitting mad, every hair standing on end like he'd been put on a high spin cycle. "How dare you?" he roared. I directed my eyes toward the coat closet I used as an office. "Lizzie, I need to make a quick call. Can you watch the front?" Lizzie looked up from the vase of roses she was arranging and nodded. "Of course." "Thanks." I gave Flapjack another meaningful glance and then stepped into the office. He appeared on the middle of my desk. "You didn't give me another choice," I told him after I closed the door. "You attacked another ghost, Flapjack. What was I supposed to do?" "It's not like I can actually hurt her," he snapped back. "You're supposed to be on my side." "I am," I replied calmly. Flapjack glared at me for another long moment before he sat down and began smoothing his ruffled fur back into place. Generally speaking, I preferred defense as opposed to offense when it came to my interactions with the spirit world. Salt could provide an easy barrier to keep ghosts out of the parts of my life where they were unwanted. Particularly troublesome ghosts could be contained in the small sphere I referred to as a ghost trap. I wasn't sure how the magic worked, but Hayward and Flapjack had both occupied the space and assured me it didn't do any harm. But occasionally, when in a pinch, I was forced to use the final weapon in my arsenal: iron. Iron didn't hurt ghosts, but it was an unpleasant experience for the spirit as they were essentially dissolved into a million particles. They would reassemble themselves back into the correct form, usually within a few minutes, typically in the place their spirit considered home base. For Flapjack, that was my apartment. For the ghost bride, well, I wasn't sure, but I assumed she was collecting herself, literally, back at the chapel. "I'm sorry, all right?" I said with a sigh, as Flapjack made a show of smoothing the fur on his face. "Apology not accepted," the cat huffed. If it makes you feel better, I likely just blew whatever sliver of a chance I had at getting the chapel reservation, I muttered. Maybe the rumpus room at the Lutheran church in Pine Shoals wasn't as bad as I think. Maybe I could drape some kind of fabric over those hideous maroon chairs. Flapjack groaned. You can't get married in something called a rumpus room. It's fine, I told him. It'll work out. The phone rang, and I hurried to answer it. When I finished taking down the details of the order, I hung up and realized that somewhere in the middle of the call, Flapjack had vanished. I sighed and sagged back in my chair. Looks like I'll be running to the fish market tonight. To my surprise, Flapjack circled back to the shop later that night, just after closing, and following one step behind him was the chapel ghost. I stopped counting the till money and crossed my arms. Well, this is an odd pairing. I'm ready to talk, the bride said. I looked at Flapjack. We kissed and made up, he assured me. He explained how you've helped others like me, the bride added. I'd like to take you up on the offer. How do we start? I grabbed a pen and a daisy-shaped Post-it note from the basket beside the phone. What do you remember about the day you died? I asked. The ghost bride drew in a slow, measured breath, and then launched into her recollection. It was 2.5 years ago, on the morning of June 24th, my wedding day. I was in the bridal suite in my dress, hair and makeup done, mere minutes away from I do. I asked for a few minutes alone. My family and friends were all on my last nerve, and I just needed a second to myself. Irritation jerked at the muscles, well, if ghosts had muscles, in her face at the memory. I was looking out the window. I heard the door open and I turned, expecting someone to tell me it was time to go upstairs. But I never saw who it was. The memories haven't come back. She paused, a pained look in her eyes. Everyone said it was blunt force trauma to the back of the head. I guess one good whack was all it took. You might never get the exact memory of your death back, I told her quietly, especially when it was so sudden and unexpected. So I've been told, she replied bitterly. There are 6 ghosts in the cemetery out behind the chapel, and they're a chatty bunch. Useless, too. None of them saw anything the day of my wedding. They tend to go back into their graves whenever the living are around. How boring, Flapjack replied. Before you showed up, I didn't know that ghosts ever did anything else, let alone that animals could be ghosts. She paused and considered Flapjack. How is it that you can talk, anyway? Flapjack showed his teeth in a feline smile. It's a blessing. That's up for debate, I muttered. I had a cat, she said, a wistful smile pulling at her lips. I called him Handsome, something that caused more than a little confusion when we moved in with my fiancé, Marshall. Speaking of, what is your name? I asked, pen poised. Heather Ritchie, she replied. Flapjack perked. Any relation to Lionel? Heather rolled her eyes. No. If you had a nickel, right? Flapjack replied. My phone chirped, and I glanced at the screen. It was a text from Lucas. He was home from work and wanted to see if I was free. Excuse me, I said to Heather before tapping out a quick reply. Her fiancé, Flapjack filled in helpfully. The two of them are insufferable. I'd say you'll get used to it the more you hang around, but it's been years and I'm still nauseated. I glared at him over the screen of my phone, but didn't comment. He'd seemingly forgiven me for the omelet pan incident earlier, and had gone out of his way to help me with the chapel. I'd let his mouthiness slide, at least for the next 24 hours. Which, when it came to Flapjack, was probably about 23 hours too long. Okay, so let me get this straight. You solve her murder, and she promises to leave us alone while we get married at the Rosewood? Lucas asked, after I gave him the rundown over video chat later that night. I know it sounds nuts, I said, pacing across the living room. I held my laptop up like it was the baby Simba to my Rafiki, silently pleading with my spotty Wi-Fi connection. Lucas's face filled the screen, but the image was fuzzy. Is that better? I asked, squinting. I can hear you just fine, he replied. I frowned and took another tentative step forward. Yeah, but do I look like some kind of 80s special effect cyborg? Lucas laughed. You look beautiful, even when you're pixelated. Flapjack groaned from his place stretched along the back of the couch. Remind me to start looking for a new roommate soon, he grumbled. You two are insufferable enough as it is. I can't fathom the level of nausea I'll experience when you're in your honeymooner bubble. Barf. I rolled my eyes. What? Lucas asked. I'll give you one guess. He grinned. Flapjack? Ding, ding, ding. Lucas chuckled. He's threatening to find new people to haunt after the wedding. We're so cute that it's sickening him. That's not what I said, the cat complained. I never said anything about cute. I moved toward the kitchen, hoping the connection would hold. My stomach was rumbling loudly, and I needed both hands free to whip something up for dinner. After Heather left the shop, Gwen and Hayward stopped by, and I caught them up on the deal I'd struck with Heather. They were surprised by the sudden change of heart, and maybe a little put off, but Gwen was happy that I'd at least found the venue of my dreams, and we got so caught up in wedding talk that we didn't even notice Flapjack and Hayward leave the shop. Listen, I said, placing the laptop on the kitchen table. I'll handle Heather. That's the ghost bride lady. For all we know, the killer might have already been caught and she just doesn't know about it yet because she's been holed up in the chapel all this time. As I crossed the kitchen to get a mini pizza from the freezer, I heard Lucas start tapping away on his keyboard. You get a last name? He asked. This isn't my first ghost rodeo, I scoffed. It's Ritchie. She died June 24th, 2017. Blunt force trauma to the back of the head. She doesn't have a memory of the blow. More typing. I tore the packaging off the pizza and chucked the frozen brick into the microwave. Any chance you're going to put sardines on that? Flapjack asked, gliding into the kitchen. That's about as likely as you waking up tomorrow and finding yourself madly in love with Mrs. Miller's Pomeranian. Gonna assume that was directed at the cat, too, Lucas mumbled, still typing on his end of the video call. You hear that? Flapjack asked, his nose scrunched in disgust. The cat. Is that what he'd call me if I was still alive? I shrugged one shoulder and leaned against the counter. I really don't know. Should I adopt a kitten and find out? I giggled as a look of pure terror gripped Flapjack and wished I could snap a photo of his expression just to show Hayward. It was a shame I was the only witness. I'll take that as a no. Maybe a dog instead? Flapjack muttered something under his breath and then sank through the floor, vanishing out of sight. The microwave beeped, and I turned the plate before adding an extra minute and a half to the timer. Anything interesting? I asked Lucas. There's a few articles about it, but it doesn't look like there's been any updates since. I'll keep digging, though. There should be an archive of the local newspapers. Not every story gets published online. Is there anything about the investigation? Did they ever make an arrest? Lucas shook his head, even as he continued to read. Says the police questioned the family and wedding party, but no arrests were made. Doesn't sound like they ever really zeroed in on a lead suspect. Or if they did, they didn't inform the press. Great, another cold case. The timer rang again, and I grabbed a fork from the drawer beside the stove. It's hard enough for experienced detectives to crack a cold case. I don't have the resources or the training. I'd say you have some experience with solving cold cases, not to mention a few advantages over the police force, Lucas replied, still reading. He was at least partially right. I had solved a handful of old murder cases, but for the most part it boiled down to luck and tenacity, not to mention time, something I didn't currently have a lot of. Let's start at the beginning, Lucas said, breaking through the barrier of anxiety I'd started building around myself. The first suspect has to be the fiancé, right? That's where the investigators would have started. Looks like he was loaded. Marshall Christopher. Looks like his mother is a well-known divorce attorney, partner in her firm. Father's big in real estate. The microwave timer chimed, and I burnt off half my fingertips transferring the miniature pie to a ceramic plate. What about Marshall himself? I asked, running my tender fingertips under the tap. Is he a stereotypical trust fund baby, or does he make use of his silver spoon? Lucas chuckled as he clicked around to other articles. Looks like he went to law school, following in his mother's footsteps, perhaps. But ultimately, he decided to go in with some friends on a venture capitalist deal, some tech gadget. It went big and they made a bundle, rolled that into the next deal, and so on and so forth. Ka-ching, I said. Looks like he and Heather met through work, Lucas continued. I just sent you a link to their engagement announcement. I carried my plate to the table and clicked onto the article. The happy couple's formal portrait filled half the screen, followed by the announcement. You know, it's only a matter of time before my mother insists we have something like this published in the paper back home, I told Lucas as I scrolled down the page. I'm actually shocked she hasn't sent a photographer over yet. Lucas laughed. Don't suppose that picture of us sunburnt and cranky on that booze cruise a few months back would make the cut, huh? I grinned. No, but that's a great idea. I'll keep that one at the ready for when she asks. Lucas held out his hands. Just as long as you don't sell me out and tell her it was my idea. I blew him a kiss. Never. According to the article, Heather worked for one of the small startup companies that Marshall and his partners ended up investing in. The two worked closely on the project, and that was the start of their romantic relationship. He proposed at the top of the Empire State Building the day the company went public on the stock exchange. Marshall Christopher was an above-average-looking guy. One of those impeccably groomed, well-dressed men that looked like they fell out of the pages of an Eddie Bauer catalog. He was tall, likely a couple inches over 6 feet, and had broad shoulders that were masculine but not large enough to land him in linebacker territory. In the photograph, he stood behind Heather, his arms wrapped around her, their hands interlocked at her waist. They were each smiling, but the glow didn't fully reach their eyes. They're a little plastic, don't you think? I said, shoveling a too large and too hot bite of pizza into my mouth. I bit down and immediately regretted it. You all right? Lucas asked with a wince as I fanned my open mouth. Hot, 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 I panted, reaching for my iced tea. When I got the fire on my tongue extinguished, I gestured at the screen. Look how he's got her hands clasped. Does that look kind of aggressive? Possessive? I don't know. They look more like they're uncomfortable. For all we know, his mother forced them into the announcement and photo shoot. I think we'd look a little stiff if we were in their shoes. Fair enough, I conceded. It really wouldn't make sense for him to be the killer. I mean, why go through all the trouble and expense of planning a big wedding only to end up killing your bride? They weren't married, so it's not likely there was any kind of life insurance money in play. Not that he needs it from the look of things. Maybe they weren't getting along, Lucas suggested. Maybe he wanted out of the wedding but knew his family would throw a fit if he backed out at the last second. Maybe, I said slowly. I wonder who paid for the wedding. I can't say for sure, but if I had to guess, I'd say his. There's a picture of the invitation on her social media, and it's worded as though his parents are the ones inviting the guests to attend the ceremony and reception. I'm not quite up to date on my Emily Post required reading, but I think that means they foot the bill. I smiled. Color me impressed. You've been studying up on wedding etiquette? Something like that, Lucas chuckled. Speaking of, does this mean we need to pin down a date? Lucas asked after a moment. A flutter ricocheted around my stomach, but I couldn't hold back my smile. If all else fails, I can send Heather to the other world for safekeeping. Lucas laughed. Yeah, let's make that our plan Z and work through the rest of the letters first. A ghost could be a real party crasher, but I have a feeling a rogue demon might be even worse. Oh, come on, I teased. Where's your sense of adventure? Chapter 7. It's all too easy to hit the snooze button on an alarm clock. Silencing a persistent ghost cat? Not as easy. Hey, Scar, I know it's early and we're not supposed to wake you up anymore, but... I pried one eye open and found Flapjack staring at me from the empty pillow beside mine. In fairness, your alarm clock has gone off 3 times already. Yeah, I mumbled, my face halfway smashed into the pillow. The room was still dark and cold. I tugged the covers up higher. What do you want? There's another broken flower pot downstairs. I blinked, my eyes adjusting to the darkness. What? Just like yesterday, Flapjack replied. Same spot and everything. Ah. Groaning, I tossed aside the covers and pushed up to a sitting position. I hate winter, I complained, scowling across the room at the dark window. It's too dark, too cold, too long. I combed my fingers through my hair, arranging the tangled strands into some semblance of order before securing them with an elastic band from the bedside table. Ponytail secured, I dug through my covers for the sweatshirt I'd shucked off sometime in the night. Did anyone see anything? Where's Hayward? Hayward and Gwen were occupied. He paused, his whiskers twitching. They were in your office, and they heard a... I wrinkled my nose. In my office? Flapjack nodded. That's their make-out spot. Sweet juniper branches, I grumbled. That's just what I needed, a visual of those two making ghost whoopee on my desk. I scrubbed my eyes with my fists, my mother's chiding voice sounding in the back of my head about the danger of giving myself premature wrinkles. They heard a crash and went out to see what happened and found the broken flower pot. Flapjack continued. Where were you? What time did all of this happen? I asked, throwing my legs over the side of the bed. I tapped my feet around, trying to locate my slippers. The wood floors were freezing this time of year, and I made it a point to always have thick socks or slippers on, especially first thing in the morning. I was out, he answered. I craned around and frowned at him. That's cryptic. What were you doing? Did you find an all-night fish buffet or something? Flapjack was always cranky, but rarely was he cagey. Something was up. I was just out. Is that all right? I shoved my feet into my slippers and got up from the side of the bed. All right, keep your secret. But if you're getting in trouble or harassing people and I find out about it, I'll lock you in a shoebox when I can't keep an eye on you. A shoebox? My threat clearly amused him. I leaned in and smiled. I can touch you now, remember? I'll bet I could grab you by the scruff of the neck like the vet had to whenever you had to get vaccines. I reached out for him, and he retreated. If he were living, and therefore subject to the laws of gravity, he'd have splatted right down onto the floor on the other side of the bed. As it was, he hovered in midair, and then surged to the right, whizzing out of the room faster than I'd ever seen him move before. I smiled to myself and went to the bathroom. I'd never actually lock Flapjack up, but it didn't hurt to remind him that he wasn't the one calling the shots. As I got ready for the day, I reminded myself to ask Hayward to find out what Flapjack was up to while the rest of the world was sleeping. Oh, and to tell him to find a new love nest. Once dressed and partially caffeinated, I trudged downstairs and found the shards of pottery just as Flapjack described. The door was locked, and none of the windows were broken. The register was still full, and it didn't look as though anything else had been touched. I don't get it, I mused, circling back to the computer after the walkthrough. It has to be a ghost. But who? And why? What's so offensive about these flower pots? I thought you had a salt line around the perimeter of the shop, Flapjack said. I used to, I replied. The problem is I kept vacuuming it up and having to reset it every day. It just got to be too much of a pain. You and Gwen and Hayward are all free to come and go. If I put down the salt, it locks you in or out. Besides, I continued, since the Tuesday night meeting started, I haven't really needed to prevent strange ghosts from coming in. Everyone in town knows that if they want to talk to me, I'm only available on Tuesday nights. Even with Gwen in charge, I haven't had strange ghost encounters. Flapjack glanced around the shop. I suppose that is one perk of staying in a small town. Everyone knows everyone, including the local ghost pop. What are you going to do in Seattle? It's going to be all but impossible to ignore every ghost that comes your way. I smiled at him. That's why I have you. You can be my bouncer. Flapjack flashed his teeth as a mischievous glint sparked in his once blue eyes. When do I get to negotiate my salary? I laughed. Let's just hope the new house has a garage. I don't want the entire house stuck in some perma-tuna smell. I think sardines on Monday, albacore on Tuesday, mackerel on Wednesday. I rolled my eyes and went to clean up the pottery shards as Flapjack debated with himself over his future demands. Even though he could no longer eat his favorite fish, he still retained his sense of smell and loved nothing more than rolling through a plate of fish. Whenever I needed him to do something, it usually came attached to a deal involving some kind of seafood. The longer I agreed to leave it out, the sweeter the bargain became for him. You have to remember it's not just the three of us in Seattle. I said over my shoulder, stooping over the broken pot. Lucas isn't used to your rotten fish buffet, and I think it's a pretty big ask to turn our garage into your own personal fish market. I have a feeling there might only be 3 of us, Flapjack replied casually. I paused and twisted around to face him. What do you mean? You, me, Hayward, and Lucas, that's 4. I wouldn't count on our formal friend to tag along for our next chapter of adventures. Did he tell you that? I asked, pushing to my feet. Hayward said he's staying here in Beechwood? Not in so many words, but it seems pretty obvious that his loyalty is with Gwen. I mean, 9 times out of 10 he's off with her or she's here with us. You really think he's going to give her up to move to Seattle? My conversation with Gwen replayed through my mind. I'd known she wasn't going to come with us to Seattle. Beechwood Harbor was her home and always would be. In a way, a big city like Seattle would be more fun for her, and I imagined she'd come visit us every so often. But at her heart, she was a small-town girl. But Hayward? We'd been traveling companions for so long that he was nearly as ingrained in my life as Flapjack. He was my family. I frowned and took the broken pieces to the nearest trash can. We'll see where things land. The move is still a ways away, a lot could change. As if conjured, Gwen and Hayward materialized through the front door. Oh, Scarlett, I'm so sorry we had to wake you, Gwen said. I brushed off my hands. I was already awake. Flapjack snorted. Gwen ignored the cat and continued. We went across the street to see if we could find a witness, but no one saw anything.
Don't fret, Lady Scarlett. We'll be more vigilant going forward,
Hayward assured me. Flapjack scoffed. You sure about that, Romeo? Hayward bristled, his mustache twitching.
Were you spying on us?
Trust me, that's not something anyone wants to see, Flapjack replied. Let's just say it didn't take a bandana or a sock on the door to know what you 2 were up to in there. I rolled my eyes. Yeah, actually about that. I'm happy you 2 are together, but my office isn't your no-tell motel, all right? Gwen giggled and clung to Hayward's arm. Looks like we're busted. Hayward looked ready to pull his top hat down over his entire head. If he were live in vivid Technicolor, I imagined his cheeks would be the hue of a ripe plum. We'll get to the bottom of these broken pots sooner or later. Luckily, they're cheap. I sighed and pulled a stack of papers out of the printer, the website orders that had come in since the last time I checked. Yeesh, I have a ton of work to do today. I've got another order for funeral flowers that came in last night, bringing the weekend's total to 2, and then I have to make up half a dozen arrangements for Thursday for a family reunion. I pulled up the digital order tracker and cross-checked the stack of pages to make sure nothing had been canceled. We'll have the meeting tonight and we can see about rustling up some volunteers to keep an eye on things around here. Gee, here's an idea, Scar. Get G.I. Joe to install a system next time he comes to town. It's kind of his thing. I frowned at Flapjack. I'll give him a call, but he's in Seattle until the weekend. It was a little ironic to be engaged to a man in the security industry and not have my shop wired up like Fort Knox. Lucas had offered in the past, but I'd always put him off. I didn't see the point, and it would just be one more thing for me to remember to deal with. Back when I'd first opened the store, I'd had some trouble with a different ghost, and she'd broken the front door of the shop. The landlord had replaced the door and installed a security camera above the entrance to watch the street out in front of the shop, but it wouldn't help me see what was going on inside the shop. He hadn't cared all that much about my inventory or cash register, just his own property. We can handle this on our own, I said. Don't you think, Gwen? She nodded, her feather earrings swaying vigorously. Definitely. We've got 20 pairs of eyes that can keep a lookout on the shop. After everything you've done for them, I'm sure most members would be happy to help. Speaking of, have you heard of any disgruntled ghosts? Maybe someone's upset that I'm not hosting the meetings anymore? Or a member who used to come and suddenly stopped? I don't know the motive, but the vandalism seems a little too specific to just be random. I think it's safe to say this is someone I know or who knows me anyway. If anyone has complaints, they haven't brought them to me, Gwen replied thoughtfully. But maybe they wouldn't. Everyone in the group knows my allegiance is to you, Scarlett. I smiled at her. That's true. It can't hurt to ask around discreetly, I added. Discretion wasn't really Gwen's style. But if there was some kind of internal problem in the group, it might be best to use a whisper rather than a bullhorn. Gwen nodded. Right. Oh, there's one other thing, I said, holding up a finger. Before she left yesterday, I got Heather to agree to try one meeting. She's apprehensive, to say the least, so I'm going to need everyone to pitch in and make her feel welcome. Hayward adjusted his top hat.
You can count on us, Lady Scarlet.
Gwen called the meeting to order a few minutes early, giving plenty of time to discuss my recent vandalism before Heather was set to arrive. Unfortunately, no one knew anything, nor could they think of anyone, living or otherwise, that might be holding a grudge against me. The responses seemed genuine, and I wasn't sure which direction to point Gwen and Hayward in for follow-ups. The dozen ghosts gathered were long-term members of the support group, and I couldn't think of a motive for any of them to suddenly turn on me and start trouble. Not to mention, only 2 of the 12 were known to have any inclination toward interacting with the physical world. I think we should set up our own neighborhood watch, Gwen said. Most of us don't sleep anyway, so we should be able to rotate through a shift or 2 a week. What are we supposed to do if we see something? Margarita, one of the group's original members, asked, her hand raised. Most of us can't even push a feather across a tabletop, let alone pick up and drop a flower pot. Wouldn't it be dangerous for one of us to try and confront a ghost with that kind of power? Newsflash, you're not a flower pot, Flapjack told her in a sarcastic tone. Someone could throw a knife at your head, pointy end first, and you'd not even blink. Margarita narrowed her eyes at him. Why are you even here? You never have anything nice or helpful to contribute. I bit my lip to keep from jumping in. I'd handed the reins to Gwen, and I wouldn't yank them back at the first sign of bickering, especially when one of the disgruntled parties was Flapjack. Sarcasm was his mother tongue. Everyone is welcome to come to these meetings, Gwen said diplomatically. My suggestion would be that we all go in pairs. Would that make everyone feel safer? She threw a meaningful glance at Hayward, clearly marking him as her neighborhood watch buddy. Gwen's right, I agreed. I don't want anyone trying to stop the person responsible for the broken pots. All I need to know is who we're looking for. Once we figure that out, I can take it from there. Exactly. This is simply an observation mission, she added. Surveillance, not observation, Flapjack muttered. Gwen's idea seemed to appease the group, and the discussion turned to the logistics. Even with Flapjack's occasional wisecracks, things went smoothly, and within 15 minutes a schedule was arranged. Starting that night, there would be 2 ghosts in the shop from closing to opening, with the ghosts on duty reporting directly to me if there was any sign of trouble. With that settled, Gwen opened the floor for the attendees to talk about any issues or concerns from the week. I listened from my stool behind the front counter, occasionally chiming in with a suggestion or 2, all the while keeping my eyes on the front door waiting for Heather to arrive. The ghost problems were nothing new. Margarita was unhappy because a new family had moved into the home she haunted. Their Doberman was seemingly in tune with her presence and spent much of the day following her around, barking and growling. Dora, an elderly ghost from the nursing home down the road, was irritated with another ghost in the home for giving away all the Wheel of Fortune answers before anyone else got a chance. Jonathan, a 20-something art major, was having an existential crisis after his latest ghost girlfriend dumped him. It was nice to be back in the group, especially as they were now used to looking to Gwen as the leader, and I was able to dissolve into the background a little bit more than I used to when I was in charge. I stood at the front counter, working on the last of the arrangements for the family reunion. But as more time passed, I started to feel threads of anxiety unfurl in my stomach over Heather's absence. Why had she gone through all that trouble to track me down and present me with a deal just to skip out right after I agreed to help her? Did she have some kind of ghost social anxiety? And if so, why had she agreed to come to the meeting in the first place? I'd already called and put down a deposit to hold the reservation for our wedding. If Heather thought she could back out on her end of the bargain, she had another thing coming. As the hour neared 9 o'clock, ghosts started drifting out, some solo, others in pairs. When there were only half a dozen spirits left, a new face appeared at the door. But it wasn't Heather. It wasn't a ghost at all. Gwen yelped as the woman appeared at the shop's front door and rapped on the glass with her knuckles. "That's her," she gasped, pointing at the stranger. That's who? I asked.
That's the ghost hunter!
Chapter 8. What are you doing? Gwen squawked as I rounded the front counter. I paused and glanced over at her. I'm going to answer the door? I replied slowly, my eyebrow raised. Any reason I shouldn't? Whoever the woman was, she was watching me talk to myself with a bemused look on her face from the other side of the glass door. She offered a friendly wave, and I held up a finger. Gwen, I snapped. Is she dangerous?
No, not that I know of, at least, but Scarlet.
Ignoring her protest, I went to the door and unlocked the deadbolt. Hello, I greeted with a smile. I'm really sorry, but we're actually closed up for the night. We open tomorrow at 10. The woman was taller than me, but we shared a similar build, at least as far as I could tell given her winter clothing. Her dark-washed jeans were tucked into a pair of black boots, and she wore a thick black jacket with the hood up against the smattering of icy rain. Wisps of blonde hair peeked out around her heart-shaped face, and while she wore some makeup, it didn't conceal the freckles across the bridge of her nose or the small beauty mark above her lip. Oh, I'm not here for flowers, she said, sticking out her hand. I came to introduce myself. Claudia Reeves. I took her hand and shook it. She laughed softly at the puzzled look on my face. I'm sorry. That was a little presumptuous of me. I thought you might have heard of me before, seeing as how we're both well known in our field. You're a florist? I said, continuing to play dumb. Claudia dropped her hand. I'm a ghost hunter. I barked out a fake laugh. A ghost hunter? Well, I'm not sure what makes you think we're in similar industries, if something like that can even be classified as an industry, which I'm not sure it can. Claudia smiled, but there was a new edge to the corners. My accountant would likely argue that point. I've done quite well for myself. My own smile iced over. I'm sure I'm very happy for you, Claudia, but I'm still not sure what any of this has to do with me. Claudia laughed again, the sound melodic, if not a little too rehearsed sounding. You're Scarlett Sanderson. I've seen your picture before in the online ghost hunting community. I'm sorry, the what? Claudia studied me, and while the glance only lasted for a split second, I felt as though there wasn't a thing she missed. You really don't know? I shrugged, still keeping my arms clasped together in front of me. Not a clue. She blinked. Wow. Well, this is unexpected. We all just assumed you were a lurker on the forum, but to not know about it at all is just... Listen, I said, shuffling back a step. I don't mean to be rude, but it's late and I need to close up for the night, and there are 6 ghosts in the room behind you. 7 if you count the cat. Claudia interrupted, jutting her chin past my shoulder. A fellow with a top hat, I've seen him around town before, with that hippie chick. There's a guy with floppy hair and glasses that's clearly trying to channel Hugh Grant from some 90s rom-com. A round of gasps and whispers sounded behind me. She can see us! What does she want? Who is she? I'm out of here. It's something of a private party, I said with a smile. It's been nice meeting you, Claudia. Have a good night, and think of us if you find yourself in the market for a bouquet. Claudia opened her mouth, but I shut the door and locked it. If there'd been some kind of shade to draw, I'd have done it. As it was, the only thing I could do was kill the lights. I felt my way back to the counter, careful not to run into any of the display cases. When I reached the counter, I turned to glance over my shoulder. Claudia was gone. I exhaled slowly. That was weird. Gwen swooped into view, her semi-transparent form illuminated from the sliver of light streaming in the front from the streetlight outside. What do you think she wants? I shook my head. I have no idea. Several of the ghosts had vanished, panicked by Claudia's impromptu visit, but Gwen, Margarita, Flapjack, and Hayward remained.
I must admit, I don't quite like the way she says, hunter, Hayward interjected. It comes off rather predatory, wouldn't you say, Lady Scarlet?
She's assertive, I replied cautiously, still not sure what to make of the encounter. Has anyone seen her show? That's what she does, right? Some online show? Not yet, Gwen shook her head. Sturgeon invited us over to look her up on the computer of the house he haunts, but he couldn't figure out which buttons to press, and he wasn't listening when I tried to help. She made a frustrated, scoffing sound. He can be a stubborn old goat sometimes.
All we know is she's been in town for a week and a half. She's staying at the Lilac House in a garden view room, and she's been telling people she's here to write a book."
I looked at Hayward. "That's right, you mentioned a book before. We still don't know what it's about?" He nodded.
"I imagine something to do with her, profession."
"Great. The last thing I want is some interview I give going into her book." "What do you suppose she meant by online community?" Gwen asked. "Forums are like chat rooms, sort of. People go there to write about different topics and exchange ideas. In this case, about ghosts and where to find them." "The problem is, which one?" Flapjack added. "There's hundreds, maybe thousands of them out there." "Exactly. And 99.9% of them are run by people who wouldn't see a ghost if it was dancing on their chest while simultaneously making balloon animals." Flapjack snorted. "Nice visual." I'd clearly been looking through too many event planning directories. "You know who could help us?" Gwen said after a moment. "Nick Rivers, Holly's friend. He used to be a paranormal detective or something silly like that. That's what drew him to Beechwood Harbor in the first place. He thought the Beechwood Manor was haunted." "To be fair, it is haunted," I replied. Gwen smiled. "That's my point. He told Holly he found out about it from some internet posting." I nodded. "So maybe he knows which ones attract the legitimate people." "Worth a shot," Gwen replied. "I'm sure he wouldn't mind talking to you. If you really want to seal the deal, offer to buy him a large mocha with extra sprinkles. The man is a total chocoholic." I laughed. "Thanks for the tip." The prospect of talking to Nick was a lot less scary than the idea of Googling my own name and seeing what came up. Gwen sidled up to me as I shut down the main computer. "Flapjack told us that you booked the chapel." A grin spread across my face. "And he calls you the gossip hound. Come on, tell me, when's the big day?" "September 26th. It's a Saturday, and we will have the whole place all day. But I'm thinking late afternoon ceremony would be nice. Take advantage of the natural light, and then have the reception under the stars. Weather permitting, of course." Gwen rubbed her hands together and squealed with glee. "Do you think that I could—" "Hello?" A female voice called from the front of the shop. "Is anyone here?" Flapjack's voice cut through the dark. "It's the corpse bride." "I am not a corpse." I shut my eyes. "Is it bedtime yet?" Chapter 9. We reconvened the meeting upstairs in my apartment, away from prying eyes. Hayward and Gwen sat side by side on the love seat while Flapjack settled in on the back of the couch, his head hovering over my left shoulder as though he were some kind of ghost parrot cat. Heather reluctantly took a seat in one of my dining room chairs that I dragged into the living room. Not that it was an arduous journey. I made the introductions, and Heather recited the story of her murder. By the time she finished, Gwen had crossed her arms and pursed her lips. "I'm sorry for what happened to you, but I have to say, I'm finding it hard to muster up the will to help you after what you did to Scarlett. She's my friend, and you're essentially blackmailing her into helping you." I scooted to the edge of my own seat, ready for a war of words. "It may seem heartless to you, but I didn't know what else to bargain with," Heather replied to Gwen. She kept her tone in check, but her expression hardened, and I worried she was about to bolt. "I don't know how long it's been since you died. Quite some time, judging by the Farrah Fawcett vibe you've got going." Gwen reached up to stroke one of her feathered waves. I couldn't tell if she was miffed or flattered by Heather's remark. "But I've found we don't have much to work with as ghosts. I don't have money or jewels or any useful skills to offer in trade for help," Heather continued. "So I saw an opportunity and I struck a deal." "It's all right, Gwen." I raised a hand to keep her from spouting off. "I don't mind helping. Clearly something traumatic happened here. We've seen before what that can do to a spirit." Heather's eyes widened. "What does that mean? What's going to happen to me?" "Oh, don't worry. Whatever it is, we can handle it," Flapjack said, his eyes alight. "We're a one-stop freak show shop." I sighed and placed my face in my hands. "What?" he asked innocently. "He needs sensitivity training," Gwen told Heather. "You get used to ignoring most of the things he says after a while." Flapjack flicked his tail. I swatted the wispy fur away and then gave him a nudge to move down the couch. "Scoot!" I'm going, he grumbled. There have got to be better ways to spend the evening around here. That new witch over at the Beechwood Manor likes me. Maybe I'll move in with her when you go to Seattle. I rolled my eyes. I could be so lucky. He winked out of sight, and I exhaled. I'm sorry, Heather. He's normally more... I paused and realized that wasn't a good end to the sentence. Well, anyway, he's gone now. Hayward chuckled into the back of his gloved hand. Tell us about your fiancé, Gwen said, seeming to warm slightly to the whole situation. Is he handsome? Tall? His name is Marshall. He lives in Seattle. Heather looked down at her hands. He started dating again. His best friend lives nearby. He runs a restaurant in Pine Shoals. That's where we were going to have our reception. Anyway, I went to see him a few months ago. Sometimes Marshall would stay at his place if he was in between things. I pop in every now and again just hoping to see him. Gwen scooted closer to the woman and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. I didn't see Marshall, Heather continued. But he was on the phone with Josh, and they were talking about Marshall's new girlfriend. My heart sank. I'm so sorry, Heather. That can't be easy. She sighed. It's not that I don't want him to be happy, but... She trailed off. Hayward cleared his throat. So, you don't think he's the one who... well, you know. Heather snapped to attention. I don't know why everyone says that. No! He didn't kill me. Hayward whipped his top hat from his head and clutched it between his hands. I'm terribly sorry, miss. It wasn't my intention to offend you. I held up a hand. It's just a starting point, Heather. Statistically, I think it's something like 8 times out of 10 it is the significant other, so we have to ask. But if you're sure... Yes, she snapped. I am. Okay, I replied calmly. So, then do you have any leads? I looked through some articles from the paper around the time of your death, but it doesn't seem like the police were able to pin down a suspect during the initial investigation, and now the case has gone cold. I've had over 2 years to play through it all, over and over and over again, and I swear I don't know. I don't even have a guess. It's simply too awful to even think someone I knew could do that to me, on the day of the wedding of all days. I looked at Gwen. We all know weddings are stressful. I work with brides a lot in my line of work, and it can bring out the worst in people. Was there anyone who wasn't happy about the marriage? Heather deflated back against the chair. Marshall's mother didn't like me. She wanted Marshall to marry one of her friend's daughters, some kind of old money alliance. Marshall was the buffer between us, but there were a few tense encounters during the wedding planning. She was upset that I didn't include her in the process, even though she was the one paying for everything. Looking back, I should have just given her a job to get her out of my hair, but I was upset with her and didn't want to give an inch. Why were you so upset with her? She was forcing us, well, me, really, to sign a prenuptial agreement. She was convinced our marriage was doomed. She'd go on and on about how one day we'd file for divorce and that she'd be dead in her grave before she let me take a cent from their family. I blinked. Wow. She was brazen. She'd say stuff like that to anyone who would listen, which in her world was virtually everyone. I think I was one of the few people not cowed into submission, blinded by diamonds and Prada. Heather paused, shaking her head as if she still couldn't believe it, even after all this time. She was truly horrible. But even with her antics and backhanded compliments, I still couldn't imagine she would murder me in cold blood. Gwen lifted her brows and flashed me a meaningful glance. Heather might be convinced that her near mother-in-law couldn't be so ruthless, but from the outside looking in, it was hard to cross her off the small list of suspects. Can you walk us through the day of the wedding? I said, not willing to risk alienating Heather by pressing the mother-in-law angle too hard. You said before that you were already dressed and ready to go upstairs to the ceremony. What about earlier in the day? Was there any drama, any arguments, or conflicts? Did you see anyone lurking around who wasn't supposed to be there? Heather considered the question for a long moment. Honestly, I remember being surprised at how smoothly it all went. After a somewhat tumultuous planning process, mostly due to Mrs. Christopher. I was relieved when the day of went off without a hitch. Well, besides the big one. I swallowed hard. Right. Marshall's father is a real estate developer. He was part of a big hotel deal and reserved rooms for all of the guests for the night before. We had the rehearsal and then a big celebration dinner in the hotel banquet hall. A sort of pre-wedding reception. The hotel crew decked out the room with candles and flowers, and there was a swing band. It was all incredible and romantic and... Well, more than a few drinks were consumed over the course of the evening, so I woke up late on the morning of. The hair and makeup people were already outside my room. Who was with you in the suite? Well, it was me and Paris, my maid of honor, and then my cousin Sadie and my friend Renee. They were both bridesmaids. Okay. I bobbed my head, lining up the players like chess pieces in my head. And where was your mother-in-law? Heather groaned. She was at the chapel, making everyone miserable. Poor Pastor Micah called Paris and asked when the rest of the party would be arriving. Apparently, Diane was driving him crazy with nitpicking. Why weren't you getting ready at the chapel? I got into my gown there, but the hotel room was nicer and had more space for everyone to get their hair and makeup. With the amount of curling rods and flat irons we had going, we probably would have tripped a fuse at the church. I smiled at her, even as I braced for what could potentially be a far more painful question. Heather, I began gently. I find that oftentimes there's a gap between the moment one dies and the time they realize their state. Sometimes ghosts wake up right afterwards, but other times it's hours or sometimes even days later. Can you tell me what your first post-death memory is? Heather's mouth tensed. After a moment, Gwen looked at me. Heather, I prodded gently. Are you all right? I don't know how much time passed. The ghost took another long pause, and when she continued, her voice was slow and pained. All of my bridesmaids were crying. They tried to keep him from coming into the room, but he broke past them and fell to his knees. I'd never seen him cry like that before. Silently, I crossed Marshall's name from my own list of suspects. I didn't have to see the reaction firsthand to know it had been genuine. When the woman who'd loved him had such a visceral memory of the moment, it was written all over her face, even years removed. She might be a ghost, but that moment was haunting her. Heather blinked, and a silver tear slid down her semi-transparent cheek. She didn't bother wiping it away. After that, things were a little fuzzy. I was trying to figure out what had happened at the same time everyone else was. Finally, one of the other ghosts at the chapel came up to me and told me, flat out, that I was dead, and that no one could see me or hear me. I felt like I was going crazy, that maybe I was having some kind of hallucination from the diet pills I was taking or something. I thought I would be screaming into the void forever. She lifted her eyes to meet mine. That is, until I met you. It's a common story, Heather. Most of the ghosts I meet have a similar confession. The moments and even days or weeks after death are very confusing. There's shock and grieving, anger and resentment, denial. Those are all normal responses. Heather brushed the palm of her hand against her cheek and then nodded slowly. Well, I guess that's something. I offered a sympathetic smile. So what now? Do you think you can help me? I leaned forward. I'm going to do everything I can. Chapter 10. It took a few days of combing through articles relating to Heather's murder, but by the time Lucas came into town for the weekend, I'd compiled a list of my top suspects. I presented it to him over dinner, and he chuckled. You know, some couples go hiking on the weekend, or wine tasting. We're special, I teased. Who needs bowling and mini-golf when you could have a murder to solve and a wedding to plan? He grinned at me and took the sheet of paper from my hands. I like the wedding part. Not too crazy about the murder. Oh, come on, admit it. You're bored with your cushy corporate gig. You need this, Green. Cushy? I spent 2 hours getting my hide tanned this morning in the gym, he complained, though he couldn't manage to fully contain his smile. The boss has brought in a Krav Maga trainer to put us through the paces. Well, that all sounds very badass. Here's my tale of woe, I said, holding up my hand to showcase the tan Band-Aid stuck around my thumb. I lost a fight with a box cutter today. Ouch, Lucas winced. How bad? I don't need stitches, I groaned. It's fine. Just pointing out that you're not the only one who has it rough. Lucas laughed. I see. Heal up, and next time you come to Seattle, I'll drag you to a class. The instructor has a studio and does group classes. Gee, such incentive, I said with a laugh. Lucas turned his attention back to studying the rest of my notes, and I reached for my fork and dug into the mound of fettuccine on my plate. I'd managed to cook dinner for once. In an effort to save as much money as possible for the honeymoon, we'd agreed to eat out less. So far, I'd say we had good intentions, but not a ton of follow-through. As it was, my parents had offered to pay for the wedding, which was one massive burden off our plate, but we wanted to buy a house in Seattle, which was under one of the hottest real estate markets in the country, and the prices were only going one direction, sky high. Given the amount of times you underlined it, I'm going to assume you've got the mother-in-law pegged for it, Lucas said, considering my list. At the moment, she seems the most likely, but there are other names on there too, I replied. In fact, one of the articles I read this afternoon had a quote from Heather's ex-fiancé, Kurt. They broke off their engagement less than a year before Heather and Marshall got engaged. I looked him up, and he has a record. A couple of DUIs around the time the engagement ended. I haven't asked Heather about him yet, but if he had a temper, it might be worth checking to see if he had an alibi. Wouldn't someone have noticed if the bride's ex was skulking around the church? Lucas asked. I shrugged. Maybe. Maybe not. There's a door leading to the basement from the outside, and Heather was alone in the bridal suite. Let's say, in theory, he shows up and wants to win her back. Tell her he's changed. He finds her in the suite, in her dress. They argue. He snaps and decides that if he can't have her, then no one can. Lucas frowned. It's a little soap opera, but I suppose crazier things have happened. He went to the funeral, I added. Lucas's brows lifted. Spoke with the press and everything, I said. Interesting, Lucas drawled. Worth shaking the tree, I'd say. Who is Paris? He asked, moving to the next name on the list. Maid of honor. She's not a suspect as much as she is a person of interest. I want to talk to her. According to Heather, the two of them were together all that morning. She might have seen something or overheard an argument. I get the feeling that Heather is holding out on me. But she's the one who asked for help? Somewhat begrudgingly, I'd say. It's pretty clear she doesn't want to talk about the wedding or the events leading up to it. It's also possible that she has a hole in her memory, I suggested. That can happen with ghosts. Lucas finished reading the notes I'd scrawled in Sharpie and then set the pages aside to finish eating his pasta. Any more ghost hunter run-ins? Thankfully no. I shook my head. I still don't know what that was all about. Part of me wishes I'd asked a few more questions to see what it is she's after. I'm meeting Nick Rivers for coffee in the morning while Lizzie holds down the fort. He used to do the whole paranormal investigations thing, so he might know who she is. I looked up her YouTube channel, and it's a total joke. I honestly don't know why she's so popular. Well, aside from the fact that she has blonde hair and cleavage. Lucas snorted. Sorry. I don't know why she got under my skin so bad. I put my fork aside and slouched in my chair. Hayward and Gwen are keeping an eye on her, but it's not like they can be sneaky. She can see them and hear them. Besides that, they're busy herding ghosts through surveillance rotations down in the shop. Oh, speaking of, Lucas said, before blotting his mouth on a paper napkin, I brought the camera equipment. I can install it tomorrow while you're out to coffee. That would be wonderful, thank you. How much do I owe you for it? Lucas chuckled and reached for his beer. I'm sure something can be arranged, he teased. You're terrible, I replied, grinning like an idiot. And I'm not sure how my accountant would feel about that whole kind of under-the-table dealing. What they don't know can't hurt 'em. Lucas flashed a wicked smile. Come walk on the wild side. Maybe after we get back, I said, still smiling. Back? Are we going somewhere? Last time I checked, this town shuts down around 6 o'clock on a Friday night. Unless you want to drink at McNally's. No, we're going to meet a wedding photographer. I got up from the table, carried my plate to the kitchen, and scraped my leftovers into a small plastic container to stash in the fridge. Lucas twisted around in his chair, slinging one arm over the back. We are? I leaned against the counter. I made an appointment with Heather and Marshall's wedding photographers. I figured we could do a 2 birds, 1 stone kind of deal. I can ask some questions about the murder, and if we like their work, we can book them for the wedding while we're there. Lucas tilted his head, a slow smile spreading across his handsome face. I wasn't aware we'd picked the date. Well, I was thinking the 26th sounded nice, I replied, a sheepish lilt to my voice. I called Pastor Micah and made sure it was still available, which naturally it is. Lucas barked a laugh. You put down the deposit? No, not yet, but, I may have said the check was in the mail. Scarlett, you lied to a minister? Lucas howled with laughter. That's it, I'm pretty sure you just doomed us. I crossed the kitchen to swat him on the arm. He was too fast and managed to dodge the playful slap, and instead gathered me in his arms and pulled me onto his lap. Little heathen, he purred into my ear. Giggling, I freed myself from his grasp and flounced off to the bathroom. We're leaving in 5 minutes. Lucas started singing Highway to Hell as I closed the door. You have a beautiful home, Mr. and Mrs. Romero. Oh, please, call us Jim and Gina, Jim told me with a wide smile. And thank you. Would you care for something to drink? Gina asked, as Lucas and I took a seat on the couch in the couple's living room. I have lemonade, iced tea, water, or I could put on a pot of coffee if you're night owls. Iced tea for me, I replied with a sweet smile. I'll have the same, Lucas said. Thank you. Gina smiled and ducked into the family's kitchen. The couple worked from their home and held consultations from their living room, as opposed to a formal studio. I appreciated the homey feeling and the ambiance of the couple's small, craftsman-style home. Jim, a barrel-chested man who appeared to be in his late 40s, took a seat opposite us in one of the 2 reclining chairs. He gestured at an assortment of leather-bound albums on the coffee table between us. Feel free to peek through any of those for examples of our work. We also offer large prints, he added, pointing at one wall where a collection of large 8x10 and 11x14 portraits hung. The couple's aesthetic was clean and seemed to hold a preference for natural light. As Lucas thumbed through one of the albums, it appeared they captured a balanced mix of candid shots and the more formal, staged photographs. Wedding photography was never something I'd given much thought to on a personal level, but the Romero's work was clearly top-notch. I leaned over to study the glossy photos with Lucas and smiled, imagining our own portraits hanging on the walls of our own home someday. So, tell me, how did you hear about us? Jim asked as we flipped through the albums. I glanced up. We got a recommendation from Pastor Micah at the Rosewood Chapel. Oh, that's a beautiful venue, Gina chimed in as she bustled back into the room, 4 tall glasses balanced on a tray. All that natural light is a photographer's dream. It's really special, I agreed, before taking the drink she offered. Thank you. Gina handed out the other drinks and took her seat in the recliner beside her husband's. Remind me, when is your date? She asked, grabbing a well-worn day planner from the table between the 2 chairs. I know I asked over the phone, but I forgot to jot it down. September 26th, I said. A little flutter wiggled through my stomach. We really had a wedding date. This abstract idea of a wedding was now turning into a reality, and even though the date was nearly a year off, it suddenly felt like someone had stomped on the gas. Perfect, Gina declared, making a note in her book. We have that date wide open. The night before is open, too, in case you want to book a shoot for the rehearsal dinner. Some couples want that documented as well. Oh, I hadn't even thought about it. I looked at Lucas, and he shrugged. You have plenty of time to decide all that, Gina said, offering a warm smile. Don't overwhelm yourself. It's still early days. And of course, none of this is binding. You're under no obligation. If you decide we're a good fit, then we'll draw up a contract and make it official. Right. I bobbed my chin and then returned my attention to the photo album in Lucas's hands. Your work speaks for itself, really. These pictures are stunning. Thank you, Jim and Gina said in unison. We find it helps having a husband-wife team on the big day, Jim continued. 2 photographers all but guarantees that not a moment will be missed. Gina is an expert at getting candid shots, whereas I focus more on the formal photographs. I like that, I replied. I think we want a balance of both. Do you have any questions for us? Gina asked. About the process itself or about our different package options? Give them the menu, Jim told her, gesturing at the table. Gina leaned forward and plucked a glossy brochure from a stack. She handed it to Lucas. This is a detailed breakdown of our services, and it also has all our contact information. Lucas opened the brochure, and I tried not to swallow my tongue at the prices listed. Virtually every couple tells us that the day itself flies by in the blink of an eye, and at the end of it, the pictures are what will last forever, Gina said. I've heard that before, too, I agreed. Would we get digital copies of all the edited photos? Lucas asked. Oh, yes, Gina said, nodding. We'll present you with a USB drive that contains every photo, and you'll also have access to our website where you can order professional quality prints or a full album. Great. Lucas folded the brochure closed and then handed it to me to tuck in my purse. You mentioned something about photographing the rehearsal dinner? It's an option, Jim replied. Not all couples add that on, but some do. Did Marshall Christopher and Heather Ritchie have you shoot the rehearsal? I asked casually. Jim and Gina froze, not even blinking for a long moment before exchanging a startled glance. Marshall and Heather? Were you, friends of theirs? Jim finally stammered. I knew Heather, I replied, which, in fairness, wasn't a complete lie. I just knew a different version than most. Lucas followed my lead. It's such a tragedy what happened to her, he added solemnly. Yes, Gina agreed slowly. It was quite a shock to everyone. Certainly a first, and hopefully only, for us. You were there when it happened? I asked. Gina swallowed hard. Yes. We went to photograph the setup and to get the first look at the wedding party and the bride and groom. Pastor Micah mentioned that some couples do a sort of first look photo session before the ceremony, I said. Yes, Gina replied. That's an option, of course. It really comes down to personal preference. Did Marshall and Heather see one another before she was found? Gina shifted in her seat and looked at her husband. They did, Jim replied. It wasn't originally scheduled. When they booked us, they decided to wait until after the ceremony and follow the more traditional rules of not seeing one another beforehand, but, well, to be frank, there was some tension, and they wanted to clear the air before walking down the aisle. I licked my lips, trying to decide how much I could press for more details without being pushy. Do you know what the tension was about? The couple exchanged another meaningful glance. It was clear they were struggling with how much to say, too. They didn't want to risk losing us as potential clients, but there was a reluctance to discuss Heather's death. I was about to rescind the question when Gina spoke up. The groom's mother was upset, and she was threatening Marshall, telling him she was about to call the whole thing off and send the guests home. His parents were paying for the wedding, and she was upset with Heather over some comments she overheard. What kind of comments? Lucas asked. Gina drew in a deep breath. I'm not sure I should say. She looked at her husband. Maintaining our client's confidentiality is important to us, Jim said. But yes, there was some tension at the rehearsal dinner and it spilled into the wedding day. It happens. Weddings have a tendency to amplify existing fissures in a family, and it's our job to take some of the pressure off by keeping the trains running on time. Our goal is not only to present our clients with keepsake memories to treasure for a lifetime, but also to help make sure the whole process is as stress-free as possible. That's really nice, I said, smiling at the couple. I wanted to dig in deeper and figure out who were the players in the drama at the Christopher wedding, but it was clear I'd gotten everything I was going to from the Romeros. Lucas cleared his throat. I'd love to see a sample of the website and how the ordering works. Is there a dummy account we could look at? Sure thing, Jim said, scrambling into action. The couple mainly seemed relieved to be off the topic of Heather's murder. Jim went to the small secretary desk in the corner of the living room and wrote a note on a Post-it.
"This is the login for our daughter's account. She doesn't mind us passing out her login as an example. Anyway, you can go see the pictures and get an idea of how the technical side of things works," he said, handing the sticky note to Lucas.
"Thanks," Lucas replied, pocketing the note. "We'll be in touch as soon as we've decided what works best for our wedding."
"Great," Gina said, her genuine smile back in place. "Don't hesitate to call or text with any questions." We thanked them and hurried out into the drizzly night to get back in the car.
"Well," Lucas said as soon as we shut our doors, "that was interesting."
"They definitely know something," I agreed. "I'm sure the police interviewed them as witnesses. I wonder what they told them."
"I don't know, but I'd say we have our first lead." Chapter 11. Another broken flower pot was in the middle of the shop when I made it downstairs the next morning, bleary-eyed and in desperate need of caffeine. I swore loudly when I spotted the shards of pottery and Flapjack melted into view. "Looks like Gwenny and Sir Bumbles-a-lot have some explaining to do," he said. "Where were you?" I asked. "I'm not part of your little neighborhood watch, remember?" I frowned. "Why is that? You have some kind of double life going on? Where have you been disappearing to lately?" "Scarlet, are you down here?" I turned at Lucas's voice just as he finished descending the staircase. "Did I wake you? I was trying to slip out unnoticed." "Nah, my alarm went off. I forgot to turn it off last night." He ran a hand through his sandy brown hair and looked around the studio. "Are you working?" "I need to get the deliveries loaded up for Lizzie so she can do a round before we open." I glanced over my shoulder at the broken pot. "Any chance you're going to be able to get those security cameras up today?" "Sure." "That would be great." I gestured at the shards of pottery. "My vandal struck again sometime last night." Concern etched into the lines around Lucas's mouth, and his shoulders shifted back as he strode to the front door. "You're sure this is a ghost, not a person?" he asked, as he inspected the door and front windows for any sign of damage. I squatted down beside the shards. "Well, either it's a ghost or it's someone with a key and a really bizarre aversion to these African violet planters." "Right." He nodded, his mouth still a tense, all-business line. "But ghosts won't show up on a security feed, will they?" "To a quote-unquote normal person, no. A ghost wouldn't show up on security footage," I replied. "Luckily for me, I'm a good distance from normal." That broke Lucas's hard facade, and he smiled at me. "Good thing, too. Normal's overrated." "Highly," I agreed. He bent to pick up the last of the mess. When the broken pot was cleared, I went to the computer to once again adjust the inventory. Lucas pointed at the ceiling. "Let me get dressed and then I'll run out for coffee. Siren Song is open this early on a Saturday, right?" I nodded. "Sure is." Lucas disappeared into the back, and the fireproof door shut a few seconds later. I turned to Flapjack. "Gwen and Hayward were the ones on patrol last night?" The cat nodded. "Of course. They might have gotten distracted." "Seriously, they're worse than teenagers," I groaned. "Where are they now?" Flapjack swished his tail. "Not that it's my job to keep tabs on them, but I happen to know they're taking a morning stroll," he replied, adding a faux British flair to the words. "I passed them on my way here." "You're just getting in?" I frowned at him, growing even more concerned over what kind of nighttime antics he might be up to. "Yes, and I'm not staying for long. Thistle has a fish fry going on this afternoon, and I don't want to miss any of the prep." I wrinkled my nose. "Sounds fun." "Salmon, snapper, halibut, even some catfish." I chuckled and finished adjusting the inventory. "Well, if you happen to see the lovebirds on your way over to the market, send them my way. It's time we have a little chit-chat. I don't know why they bothered to volunteer to head up the surveillance efforts if they can't keep their hands off each other. I mean, I'm happy for them, but yeesh." "Maybe the vandal came in after they left for their walk," Flapjack suggested. "Hopefully I can catch whoever it is on the cameras," I said. "Listen, let's not make it public knowledge that the cameras are going up." "My lips are sealed," the cat agreed. "If only," I teased, smiling at him. "Humph." "So when are you going to tell me where you've been sneaking off to lately?" I asked, As I crossed the studio to the large walk-in cooler where I stored the fresh-cut flowers and arrangements waiting to go out on the delivery route, I'd garnered a rather long list of monthly customers who received a seasonal bouquet every 10 days. Additionally, I serviced several local businesses, providing them with artful, dealer's choice arrangements for their offices or retail shops. The Lilac House was my biggest account, as they ordered enough to have flowers for every guest room upon arrival and also had arrangements in the living room that served both as a lounge space as well as the main reservation desk for the bed and breakfast. They also had an exclusivity deal with me for all events. I swung the door of the cooler open and shivered at the blast of frosty air. It wasn't as cold as a restaurant freezer, but it was chilly, and on a November morning when it was still dark outside and the heat hadn't kicked in, I made a point not to linger. "Does it matter?" Flapjack replied. "Well, no, I guess not, but I'd like to know what's going on. It's not like you to be so cagey," I called over my shoulder as I grabbed a bucket of roses and shoved it out of the cooler. A bucket of carnations, alströmerias, and hydrangeas followed. "Flapjack," I said, pausing my work. I poked my head out of the cooler and realized the ghost cat was gone. Well, that was rude, I grumbled to myself. "Did you say something?" I started at Lucas's voice. "Oh, no, I was talking to Flapjack, but he's not here. I don't know what he's been up to lately, but if I find out he's been harassing people, I'm gonna tell Hayward and Gwen that he's their problem. I'll be spiritless in Seattle." Lucas chuckled. Somehow I doubt that would last more than a week or two. I frowned, but couldn't argue his point. He was probably right. "I didn't realize Hayward was staying behind," Lucas said. "I haven't talked to him about it, but that's my best guess. He wants to be with Gwen, and there's no way she's leaving Beechwood Harbor." "You okay with that?" Lucas asked, suddenly serious. I looked up from a bucket of yellow roses that had seen better days. "Why wouldn't I be?" Lucas hitched one shoulder. "I don't know. The four of you are kind of a package deal, it seems. I wouldn't ask you to give up any of your living friends, so why would I ask you to give up the dead ones?" I smiled. "That sounds weird, even to me." "You know what I mean," he said, chuckling. "I do, and I appreciate it, but I'm not really giving them up." I fell silent as I picked through the roses. Frowning, I chucked a few faded ones into the compostable bin. I guess in a way, it's goodbye. It's not like I can call them on the phone or something. I mean, maybe I could call Holly and she'd put me on speaker. I don't actually know if that would work. I'll have to do a trial run, see if ghost voices carry over phone lines. "We'll come back to visit," Lucas assured me. "Maybe in a few years we can scrape together the cash to buy a little beach house for vacations." My eyes widened. "Really?" He shrugged. "Sure, it would be nice, especially after we start a family." "I'd like that," I said, smiling at the idea of us one day packing up for the beach, bringing our kids to the ocean. Lucas's expression twisted, his brow furrowing. "What?" I asked. "Well, this might be a weird question, but is there a chance our kids would have the same, gift that you do? Would they see ghosts too?" I paused and laughed softly. "I honestly have no idea. I'd never thought about it before." Lucas smiled. "It doesn't matter to me either way. I guess I was just wondering how we'd explain that we were going to visit Mommy's invisible friends at the beach." "Oh my gosh, I don't even want to think of the looks I'd get at the next PTA meeting after those rumors circulated." Lucas laughed. "Good point. More like you don't want to be the odd man out when they start talking to their own invisible friends," I teased. "Here," I said, stepping back into the cooler to grab the last bucket. I handed it to Lucas, and he carried it to my workbench and placed it on the floor. "I'd better get started on this if I'm going to get everything ready by the time Lizzie gets here. Then, when she's back from running deliveries, I'm going out to meet Nick for coffee, remember?" Lucas nodded. "You still want something from Siren Song now?" "That's a very silly question," I teased with a wink. "It's my personal philosophy that one can never have too much coffee or too many flowers." I bopped a rose on his cheek, and he chuckled. "You've got the flower part covered. I'm off to see about the caffeine." "That's why I keep you around." He laughed and dropped a quick kiss to my forehead, and then set out on foot for the coffee house. By the time I finished off the dregs of my hazelnut vanilla latte, it was time to meet with Nick and order a refill. Lizzie was still out doing the delivery, so Lucas volunteered to watch the shop until I got back. I bundled up into my coat and gloves and hurried through the rain to the quaint coffee shop a few streets over. Nick Rivers was already waiting at a table, both of his hands wrapped around a large paper cup. I bypassed the line of people waiting to order and joined him. "You were supposed to wait for me. I was going to pick up your drink." He smiled and waved me off. "Nah, don't worry about it. I'd be here one way or another this morning." "Gwen told me you're a chocolate addict," I confessed. Nick chuckled, the sound warm and good-natured. "Well, Gwen would know. She could probably rattle off the regular order of every person in here." I laughed and bobbed my head as I scanned the line of regulars hovering around the front counter. "Probably." "So what is it you wanted to talk about?" he asked, drawing my attention away from the other patrons. "Well, word on the street is that when you originally came to the harbor, you were planning on running a paranormal tour company. Is that right?" Nick leaned back in his seat, a bemused smile on his face. He was a handsome man, even more so when he smiled. He had kind eyes that sparkled when he laughed. I wasn't exactly sure how old he was, but I wouldn't peg him as being any older than 35. He usually wore business attire around town, slacks with a button-up shirt and jacket. He drove a sleek car and lived in one of the newer condo buildings on the other side of the harbor. I wasn't entirely sure how he afforded it all, as being a private investigator in a small town didn't seem like an obvious path to wealth, but somehow he managed. "It feels like a lifetime ago," he finally said. "And I guess, in some ways it was." A flicker of something else crossed his face, fading almost as quickly as it had appeared. "But originally, yes. I came here looking for ghosts. I was a member of an online community who kept track of potential supernatural hotspots, and lots of people talked about the Beechwood Manor, but no one really seemed to have a lot of information on it. I was interested in moving to the Pacific Northwest anyway, so it all fit together." "So you were going to take tours to the manor?" I asked. "That was the plan. I would learn the history of the house and its occupants, well, the dead ones, and then take tours there to see if we could capture some paranormal activity." "What happened?" I asked. Nick laughed. "In a word, Holly." I grinned. "Oh, right. Something about her finding you skulking around in the rose bushes outside her window in the middle of the night? You're lucky she didn't hex you 6 ways to Sunday." Nick chuckled, his eyes dancing at the memory. "It's so funny to think back on those early days. She hated my guts." I smiled. It's weird for me to even try and picture it. I've only ever known you two as best friends, thick as thieves. "We've gone through a lot together, that's for sure," Nick agreed. The line had died down while we chatted. I signaled I'd be right back and hopped up to order a black coffee with a splash of almond milk, and then got talked into a day-old blueberry muffin. I returned to the table, goodies in hand, and retook my seat. "Can I ask what made you decide to leave Los Angeles in the first place? I imagine there's quite a demand for ghost tours and stuff, right?" "There is," Nick began, "but that's both a blessing and a curse. The field was a little too crowded, and it was hard to stand out." I picked up the blueberry muffin on my plate and broke off a chunk while Nick continued. "It was starting to feel like everyone was doing a version of paranormal star tours. You know, claiming they'd spoken with Marilyn Monroe's ghost at the Roosevelt Hotel, stuff like that." "And you weren't interested in that?" I asked. He shook his head. "No, I was drawn to the smaller, lesser-known spots." I smiled. "Doesn't get much smaller than Beechwood, huh?" Nick chuckled and raised his glass in a playful toast. "I would have had the market cornered." "The reason I wanted to meet is because there's a new ghost hunter in town," I told him. "Her name is Claudia Reeves, and as far as I can tell, she's the real deal. I don't know much about her yet, but she claims to be in town to write a book about her gift." "Claudia Reeves? It's not ringing any bells for me, but I haven't really been in that game for a couple of years now," Nick replied. "She has a well-known YouTube channel and quite the following." I took another bite of the muffin and washed it down with a swig of coffee. "The local ghosts, Gwen and the crew, are a little freaked out by her. I guess she's dispersed a few ghosts who got too close and—" "I'm sorry," Nick interjected. "Dispersed?" "You know, a swipe with an iron poker or frying pan." Nick gave a small nod. "Right. I guess I didn't realize we had a term for it." I shrugged. "That's what I call it, anyway." "How can I help?" Nick asked. "Well, She mentioned something about an online community. And apparently on this forum, my name has even been tossed around. I thought you might know where to look. To be honest, I'm a little afraid of Googling my own name. Nick chuckled. You don't have to explain yourself to me. I'm a private investigator. I know better than most just how much data is absorbed into the interwebs. I feigned a shudder. I don't even want to know. I'll look into it for you and see what I can find, he offered. Anything you want to know specifically? Maybe see if you can find out what this book is about and get me something to assuage the ghost population at large. I figure if I can soothe some frayed nerves, the whole thing will blow over. And if I tell Gwen and the others that you're looking into it, they won't be knocking down my door. Nick smiled. Sure thing. I'll give you a call later and let you know what I find. Thank you, Nick. I really appreciate it. I glanced at the copper-faced clock on the wall and started to gather my things. I should get back to the shop. Lizzie will be back from the delivery route soon. Tell the gang hi for me, will you? Of course. I stood and slung my purse over my shoulder. Bye. Oh, and next time, coffee's on me. Chapter 12. Lucas was sitting at the small consultation table in Lily Pond's retail space when I got back from meeting with Nick. I used the table for hosting bridal consultations, poring over my portfolio and bridal magazines, listening as the bride-to-be chattered excitedly about her plans. Lucas had turned it into his own kind of command post. A laptop sat in the middle, its screen casting a glow on his face as he sipped from his coffee cup. He glanced up when the chime on the front door sounded. Good, you're back, he said. I found something. Lizzie appeared from the back, midway through unwrapping the scarf around her neck. Her pink cheeks suggested she'd just gotten back to the shop from the delivery route. Oh, hello, Lucas. He held up a hand. Morning. How'd it go? I asked her. Oh, it was fine, she replied, removing the rest of the knit scarf. She smiled as she folded it in half. Mrs. Castillo was thrilled with her bouquet. I'd say Mr. Castillo is officially out of the doghouse. I grinned. He did up his usual budget this time. Oh, and the weekend manager at Lilac House wants to put in an order for a few small arrangements. She should be calling this afternoon. That's great. Lizzie paused at the printer, the tray empty for once. Looks like in the meantime I'll be reorganizing the ribbon box. I laughed. I'll be back to help you get untangled in a few minutes. Lizzie ducked out of sight and I crossed the room to join Lucas at the table. What is it? I asked, taking the seat beside him. He turned the laptop so I could more easily see the screen. I found the photos from the rehearsal dinner and the shots they took the morning of the wedding prior to Heather's murder. I blinked. How did you get into the albums? Lucas held up the paper Jim Romero had given him the night before. It's not a terribly complicated system to crack, he said. See, they use the last name and date in the URL and then use the couple's first names and dates as the password. Oh, Lucas chuckled. Just call me 007. Pretty sure Bond was handier with a gun or a martini glass than a keyboard, but I'll indulge you. He smiled. At least until after I tell you what I've found. Something like that, I teased. Lucas pressed a button on the keyboard and a series of pictures populated. The first was a shot from what must have been the rehearsal dinner. The happy couple were seated at a table, and a young woman with dark hair stood to one side, her hands holding a loose sheet of paper. Now, if I had to guess, I'd say that's the mother of the groom, he said, pointing at a woman standing a few paces away from the table. She wore a wine-colored evening gown and a cold smile. There's another picture that shows only the two of them together. She's fixing his tie. I sighed. Naturally, I knew the type. Mostly because Marshall's mother and mine sounded like they were cut from the same cloth. My mother loved me. I'd stopped doubting that somewhere in my early 20s. But around that same time, I'd realized that she would never stop picking at me. Stand up straight, or that dress is a little short, don't you think? Or, oh dear, we've gone over this. Peach is not your color. On and on and on. I tossed my head. I don't know why any woman goes through with a wedding knowing that's what she's marrying into. Guess I'm lucky my mom's cool, Lucas quipped. I smiled at him. Very, very lucky. You'd have really turned down my proposal if my mom acted like that? He asked, gesturing at the screen. Oh, come now, Scar. You're a pro at handling pushy mothers. I blinked and twisted around at the sound of Flapjack's voice. He sat on a shelf in the front window display, taking advantage of a fragmented ray of sun coming in through the wind chimes. "Oh, now you want to talk?" I asked, "after your little disappearing routine this morning?" Unperturbed, he raised a paw and stroked it over one side of his face, slicking his faint whiskers back in place. "I'm a ghost, Scar. It's what we do." "Fine, but you'll excuse me if I'm not in a chatty mood now," I grumbled. Twisting back around, I offered a sheepish smile to Lucas. "Sorry." "Trouble in Ghostville?" he asked. "When is there not?" I sighed. "It's not serious, just annoying," I added, raising my voice for emphasis. Yeah, Flapjack replied. I clicked to the next picture Lucas had saved. It showed Marshall standing this time, reading from a note card in one hand as he raised a glass with the other, toasting his bride. "They look happy to me," I noted, flicking to another picture and then another. They held hands, they smiled at each other. I didn't see so much as a whisper of the tension the Romeros had alluded to. In fact, the only one who looked unhappy at the dinner was Marshall's mother. "I hate to say it, but this is only reinforcing my initial gut feeling," I said quietly, even though we were the only ones in the store. Well, apart from Flapjack. "I think we need to try and figure out what exactly happened the morning of the wedding," Lucas said. "We have all of the pictures, but without narration, it's all speculation." "I'm hoping Heather stops by at some point today," I told him. "If she doesn't, I might have to see if a certain cat would be willing to trade a quick errand for a plate of tuna." "And how would you propose I get all the way out there?" Flapjack asked. "Hitch a ride?" I replied with a shrug. "Make it an adventure." He twisted his whiskers and stared at me like I'd lost complete control of my faculties. "Come on, Flapjack, please. It's not like I can pick up the phone and call her." Flapjack offered a long-suffering sigh and turned away to expose the other side of his stomach to the sunbeam. "Make it sardines, and you've got yourself a deal." I rolled my eyes and then turned back to Lucas. "I think I'll try calling Paris, the maid of honor, to see what she can tell me." "What's your cover story?" Lucas asked. I try to avoid outright lying to people, but there were times I couldn't bend poking around in cold case crimes into something rational sounding. I wasn't a detective or a private investigator, and I didn't have any kind of personal connection to the case. Sure, there was probably a small section of the population who would believe me if I said I was there at the behest of their lost loved one, but most people would call the cops. And a 5150 hold wasn't exactly the kind of excitement I was looking for in life. "I'll think of something," I told Lucas. He gave me a skeptical look, but didn't press for details. "All right, well, good luck. While you do that, I'm going to get started on the security system installation. It shouldn't take me too long. You want it set up on your laptop upstairs or the one down here in the office?" The laptop, I guess. That's what I usually end up using anyway. The one in my office is a dinosaur, at least in computer years. "Pretty sure that's a Wi-Fi issue," Lucas said. "Luckily, you won't have to deal with it too much longer. My condo has a fiber optic connection." He kissed me and then stood to gather his things. "Whatever that means," I mumbled under my breath. He laughed and headed off to the back room. "Flapjack, if Heather doesn't show up by closing, would you mind going and getting her? I have some questions I'd like to ask her." "You got the sardines?" "Not in my back pocket, but I think you can assume I'm good for it." The cat rolled on his back, curving his fluffy body into the letter C. "I don't know, Scar.